Let's call the meeting to order at 6 o'clock. First item on the agenda is roll call.
Nila Frye,
Here.
Tricia Braun,
Here.
Sam Kaufman, Kristen Runge,
Here.
Aaron Moran, Joe Zitzelsberger,
Here.
Robert McPherson.
Here.
All right. Next item, confirmation of open meeting compliance.
I can confirm that the draft agenda was published in the Waunakee Tribune on 10/13. The final agenda was posted in all 3 official posting locations on 10/11, and the final agenda and packet were made available online on 10/11. 2 important notices for the audience is please be sure you've signed in on the attendance sheet for accurate record keeping. And those interested in participating in public comment, please hand me the forms prior to that agenda item.
All right, next item on the list is public comment. Do we have any public comments?
We have one, Mary Heimbecker at 306 West 3rd Street, Waunakee.
I would like to see business item number 5 stay in open session. Village residents have a right to know what thousands of tax dollars is going to be spent on. I know at the last board meeting, the attorney said that eminent domain for condemnation, blight are not mentioned, but it's clearly mentioned at the CDA July meeting that was held. It should not take a closed session for trustees to know what is being looked at, and the people have a right to know what their money is being spent on. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Any other public comments?
No further comments.
All right, then we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, but I think we actually want to move a presentation up, Tim's presentation up.
So I will move to,
Wait, what?
that's what I'm going
Yes,
to move
that
to
will- yeah.
adjust.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'd like to move the presentation, particularly item number 1 under presentation, right after public comment.
I'll second that. All right, any discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Tim, thank you for coming today. We appreciate you taking the time.
Good evening, everyone. For those that don't know me, I'm Tim Herlitzka, General Manager, Waunakee Utilities, and I was asked tonight to come and just talk briefly about some of the electric service interruptions we've had over the last several weeks. I just have a couple brief remarks, and if people want to ask questions, I'd be happy to answer that after that. First of all, we take pride in our reliability of our electric system, and we have won numerous awards for our industry-leading reliability. And we have a dedicated staff that takes that very seriously. And unfortunately, we can't always guarantee that the power is going to be on. And there are things that happen, unfortunately, that cause the power to not to fail at times. This year was an extremely difficult year for us. We actually set a new all-time record peak at the end of August that was 12% higher than the previous all-time record peak. And that is an extraordinary number. And when you have strains on our system like we did, that can cause bad things to happen. We did reach out to 2 separate independent consulting engineers who both gave us an opinion of what the different things that happened were. And they came to the conclusion that it was just a matter of a number of things coming together at the wrong time. We did find out that when, most of our system is underground, and when you have a lot of heat that's straining the system and you don't have a lot of moisture in the ground, that causes the wires to become excessively hot. And that can help lead to some of the issues that we had as well. Another issue we have, and it's an industry issue, we continue to have wildlife getting into our electric substations. A recent example is at our Centennial substation, where our utility commission has invested tens of thousands of dollars in equipment to cover up the connections in there. And we've had repeated issues with that, where you get a squirrel that gets in there, which it made contact with equipment, and it took out about 700 customers. The ironic thing is, while we were sitting there trying to fix it, there was a number of squirrels trying to get back into the substation to do the same thing that had just happened. equipment failure can happen at any time. And during this recent spate of electric service interruptions, we had new equipment that failed, we had old equipment that failed, and we just had a spate of bad luck, which is unfortunate. Again, we take great pride into making sure that we keep things running as much as we can, but sometimes things happen. What we do have is we have an outage map on our website where people can go to find out like if power is out. We have a utility staff generated text messaging service that customers can sign up for. And we do have a number of people that signed up for that. We do have a Facebook page. Jared helps us with that. Others in our district or our utility help us update that. But not everybody's on Facebook. And we do have an after hours call service. The call service is based in Madison. It does a very good job. It doesn't do a good job when we have 700 people trying to call all at once. And that is just a inherent design flaw in, I wouldn't say design flaw, but the system isn't designed to take that many customers calling at once. And the one thing that is really kind of exciting to us that we'll be sharing with our utility commission here in the next week or so is that we are buying a new outage management system for our electric utility that will be much more, it won't predict how long power is going to be out, but there'll be much more of an interface between customers and our system to help them understand some of the issues that are going on. Again, we can't guarantee the power has been on all the time. And I know I'm going to jinx it by saying this, but you know, we had a spat of some issues that happened consecutively. We're very fortunate that we haven't had an outage in 4 weeks. Again, I don't mean to jinx anything because I'm sure the power is going to go out before I even get home tonight. But we take pride in what we do. We've just had an unfortunate series of a couple of incidents that have happened right after each other, and where hopefully things are back to normal. So I guess I would take any questions, or if anybody had concerns on anything. I know Kristen and Joe are on our commission, active members of the commission.
Nyla.
I have a question. This question was posed at a previous board meeting. And the question was, the person was wondering if the infrastructure of the utilities is keeping up with the building and development in the village. And so as long as you're here, I'd like to ask that question.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And we're fortunate because we have a lot of capacity built into our system right now. There is a project that we're going to be starting that's in our capital budget that we're going to discuss next week, where we're going to be making improvements to our Division Street substation. We're going to be buying a larger transformer for that. We're going to be taking the transformer from there and basically doubling the capacity at our north substation, which will happen over a period of 2 to 5 years because it takes a long time to get new substation equipment. But I think the utility commission has invested heavily. We're in a really good spot for capacity right now. We don't have any supply constraints. We weathered an all-time peak by our utility, by WPPI, who provides us power, and we weathered it well. And I think we're well poised for continued growth and capacity in the future.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? No, none. Thanks so much for coming. We appreciate everything that you and your crew do. Oh, I'm sorry, Robert, go ahead.
I was going to ask questions, kind of a promotion of something too, but with the introduction of the new rate plan for getting things charged overnight for people with electric vehicles and things like that, has that helped with the management load? Are we seeing any improvement because of that?
So what Robert's referring to is we have a new rate category that's the first in the state that incentivizes people to try to charge their electric vehicle between midnight and 5 a.m. Right now, people, if they want to go charge their vehicles at 3 p.m., that's the worst time of day for us because it affects the load. So when we implemented that, we expected it to be a slow process of people signing on to that rate plan. And it hasn't disappointed, where I think we probably have about 10 customers on that right now, but we didn't expect it to have like 100 customers overnight. And, that's kind of a slow moving glacier type approach to how we're going to deal with this. And we hopefully over time we'll have more and more customers on there. So good question.
Great. Any other questions? None. Thanks so much for coming. We appreciate everything that you and
Thank
your
you for
crew
moving
does
me up
to
on
keep
the
everything
agenda. I
going.
appreciate
Yeah. All right. Anytime.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. All right. So next up, I will turn the meeting over to you, Joe, for the Joint Finance Committee.
All right, then I'll call this meeting of the Finance Committee to order. Make it a roll call as well.
Sure. Joe Zitzelsberger,
Here.
Kristen Rungy,
Here.
Robert McPherson,
Here.
Sarah Whitley,
Here.
Tom Wilson, Al Dasso, Paul Cardarella.
All right, so our first, I guess technically second, based on how the agenda is here, discuss and take action on Village of Waunakee budget policies. And
Yeah,
Renee?
so welcome, everyone. Thanks for having this joint meeting. It saves us all from having to repeat ourselves multiple times in a day. So the first item for discussion is just to go over the budget policies. The majority of these policies have been around for over 20 years. They've served the village well. But it's always just good to see if there's questions, recommendations for changes. I'm just going to go through the little bit that I am proposing through the department heads gets changed. But I'm happy to talk about any of these other ones in detail. The only one that we're really proposing to change slightly is in the capital improvements policy. To fund the annual pay-as-you-go capital transportation expenditures and raise that up to $1,250,000. So the capital transportation pay-as-you-go fund covers street construction, like rebuilding of streets, that type of thing, street maintenance and trail maintenance. And so it was proposed in the early budget work to increase the trails by 15,000. So to bring it from 85,000 that it had been for the past number of years up to 100,000. So that's really the only change to any of these policies that I was, that we have. The way that the 2024 budget is proposed, we're meeting all of our policies. But again, if anybody had any thing they wanted to discuss in more detail on the policies, I'm happy to do that. Tom. Or
Go ahead.
Tom.
I just want to get a clarification on that.
Yeah,
The one that was in our packet, the number at 4E was 1,250,000. It was $15,000 less than that.
it was.
Okay.
Last year.
Yes, gotcha.
Yes.
Thank you.
So it was 1,235,000 last year.
Okay.
So a very small increase, but they felt it was important for work that they want to start doing on some of the trails.
All right, any other questions? Comments? Seeing none, I'll look for a motion.
So this will be a finance committee motion.
Correct.
I'll move approval of the policies as presented here.
All right,
Second.
Tom with a motion and Kristen with a second. Any additional discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No abstentions? That one passes. All right, we move on to the next item, which is discuss and take action to place on file proposed 2024 operating and capital improvement budget.
Thanks. I'm gonna share my screen with some slides that we will go through.
The slides are in your meeting packet too, beginning at page 110.
They are, and I printed them so that you're at kind of a bad angle there. So yeah, obviously the budget proposal in the packet is a very long section, I think 134 plus pages. So I'm not planning to go through that entire document. I'm happy to answer any questions that are in that. We're going to focus on these slides first, but I'm happy to answer questions all along. We also, the department heads will talk about their budgets a little bit. They're here for any questions that we have, along with fire and EMS here to do a brief presentation and answer questions. So I think most of you are familiar with the process, but just for everybody in the public as well, to talk about how we arrive at our draft budget that we're presenting tonight. So the departmental budget preparation starts back in June, where we send out information. All the department heads work through their line item budgets and return those to me in July. And then from July through October, Todd and myself are refining those documents and also adding in the payroll and benefits part of the budget, which we do for the village as a whole. We also talk with village board members as needed. We met with Kristen this year to get her up to speed on our budget process and where we were at. And then the next bullet, the finance committee review of the policies, we just had that as the previous agenda item. And then now we're at the point of presenting our proposed budget. Following this meeting, we will have a couple of different opportunities for public comments. At the November 6th meeting, it's kind of an additional non-required public hearing where we encourage citizens to express any wishes at that time. So we actually have time to work things into the budget if needed, because then the final public hearing, the statutory one, is the night when the budget has to be adopted. So there's less time to work in any feedback that we might get from the public. So again, we encourage people to come to that November 6th meeting if they have comments. But of course, we'll entertain any on November 20th as well. So what don't we know for this budget proposal? There's a couple of bigger items. The manufacturing valuation, which is done by the state of Wisconsin, not by our local assessor, that is not typically released until early November. At this point, we don't know of any manufacturing companies within the village that are challenging their assessment. So I'm hoping we'll be on the early end of when the Department of Revenue releases that information. But I've made my best estimates to figure out our tax rates and stuff without the final numbers. We also don't know our other jurisdictions' tax information, the schools, the county, and MATC. Those should be forthcoming in the next 2 to 4 weeks. Last year, the school was a little bit late because they had that referendum, and we were not able to get the information until after that referendum was decided. So I'm hopeful we'll maybe get things a little bit earlier this year. But I would expect that the percentage breakout would be similar to prior years, as you see here. I gotta just take a quick break. So starting with some of the key budgetary outcomes, you'll notice here that the tax rate, both the assessed and the equalized, decreased pretty substantially. And that is, as I show in the third bullet, primarily the result of our interim market update, the revaluation essentially of the entire village. As expected, when values go up in a reval, kind of generally across the board, the tax rate is going to go down. So that's what we would expect. Again, this is just the village share of the tax rate. And And we do expect, once we get those final manufacturing numbers, we're hoping that our assessment ratio will be very close to 100%. That was the goal of doing the revaluation, is to bring those things in better line. The next slide will show what that means to the tax bill. So there's kind of a lot going on in this slide, but I think it's pretty helpful information. The 2023 column or section, you'll see that the assessed value, that average increase from the interim market valuation was 30% for residential. So what I've shown here is some markers of different values and what the taxes will be. But then for 2022, I reduced those by 30% to show what the equivalent tax bill would have been before that average increase. So just focusing on the average village home is the third line down. So after the revaluation, the new average village home is $478,141, whereas last year the average village home was just about $368,000. So the tax increase for that average home would be $59 for the village share. Any questions here before we move on? Does that kind of make sense, the math there? So this shows where we're at with the general fund expenditures in this proposed budget. You'll see they're increasing about 7.8%, which is a bit higher than the 5-year average. But if you look at 2021's increase was only 3.17%. And that was really during the height of COVID, when there was a lot of uncertainty for what was going to happen in 2021. And so we were extremely conservative that year, just because we didn't know at all what was going to happen with programs and revenues and that type of thing. So that kind of brings down the average a bit. And likewise in 2022, we were still kind of coming out of the pandemic, and it was a little bit more conservative in the general fund. We're kind of closer to where we were at last year and in 2020. But the general fund is obviously the fund that houses most of the village operations, most of the personnel of the village gets coded to the general fund. So your COLA increases, your step increases, the health insurance increases that we'll talk about in one of the next slides, EMS increases and some new positions. That's all happening in the general fund. That's why it's higher than most of the other funds. As part of this process, I project out where I think we're going to end up in the end of 2023. So it's looking like we'll have a decrease in our fund balance of about $485,000, which is actually better than what we had budgeted. We had budgeted for a pretty substantial decrease in use of fund balance in the 2023 budget. Again, including things like using assigned fund balance for retirees, the assessment that we did, a pretty significant amount of tax relief last year. So again, I'm thinking we're going to end up better than budget by the end of the year. And that's really a combination of higher revenues and revenues helping cover expenditures that are up. And I do think, I didn't note it on here, but the unassigned fund balance will probably be somewhere at 26 or 27%, pretty similar to last year, just a little bit higher than what our policy is. Some other significant things to note. So our equalized growth rate is still extremely strong, just over 16%. That's higher than even last year. We were at about 14%. And I did look at Dane County as a whole, and that was only at about 12%. So we're strong even within Dane County, which is generally known to be strong. Again, higher than the 5-year average. What this really means is that increases our debt capacity. So we generally, as we saw when we talked about the financial management plan last time, we're very comfortable in our policy there to remain below 50% of the state allowable capacity. Our allowable levy increase based on our net new construction number. So that was only 2.6% this year. So that allows us to levy about another 290,000 within that limit. And that's down a fair amount from last year. Our net new construction last year was more like 3.8%. So this 2.6 is very much in line with the rest of Dane County, which is at 2.4% for this year. So a little more detail on some of those things contributing to the increase in our budget. We talked at the September 18th meeting about the health insurance program. We opted to, or the board approved staying with Quartz and staying with the 2 plans that we offer with their rate increase that they had offered to us. So that adds about 87,000 or so to the budget. Again, right now it's the amounts that are in there are based on what people took for 2023. We're in the open enrollment period right now. So, and that ends on Friday. So as people make changes, we will adjust the budget accordingly. And then EMS, we're going to talk about that more later with the EMS folks that we have here, but the village's share of the increase this year is about 172,000 or a 33% increase. Again, I'll let them talk about that when we get up to their slide. We also have some new or increased positions, people moving from a more part-time position to a full-time position, things of that nature. We're going to talk about those in more detail coming up here as well. And then right now we have a contingency in the budget of 100,000. We're currently working through the union negotiations with the police union. And then also wanted to have some in there similar to last year for any other recruitment or retention needs that we might have. So depending on when the union contract settles, we might have better information at one of our upcoming meetings as to what the true increase might be. So all of those, just a few major items, but that's the bulk of the increase of 719,000. It's again highly weighted toward personnel and benefits in our increases. We do have a couple things that'll help us out. We did get the new supplemental shared revenue of about 373,000 for the village, and that can be used for certain public safety and public works expenditures. So that'll help us, particularly with a couple of the new positions that we're looking to add. That'll be an ongoing revenue source and is tied in with the sales tax. So whereas shared revenue had been pretty stagnant for years and falling behind, this hopefully will keep up a little bit better with the times. And then we had an assigned fund balance that we called joint venture stabilization. That was going to be for any blips in the budget or unexpected costs for any of our joint ventures. And we're actually going to use some of that to ease in part of that EMS increase this year. Because, you know, kind of that's what it was intended for, to take care of blips in the budget. So a little more detail on the personnel expenses that are included in the budget. Staffing is 62% of the total general fund budget. Again, because most of the personnel are in there, and it's 34% of the budget for all funds combined, including capital funds and everything. So it's a really big part of the budget. In the current proposed budget, we are proposing a cost of living adjustment of 4% that would go into effect on January 1st. That adds about $243,600 to the budget for the, again, that's the wages only piece for all staff. Including at this time, that's what's in there for the police union contract, but we don't know exactly what they'll settle at. But the 4% is for everybody right now. And again, as I said, it's not, the police union contract is not settled yet, so we'll probably see some changes there that could impact our totals. We throw this in here just so you can kind of see the impact of a 0.5% wage change, either up or down, would increase or decrease the levy about $36,000 and add just a little bit to the tax rate. And then the 5-year history, we've typically been around 2.5% on average. Last year, with the high inflation that we were seeing, we were a little bit higher than that, lower than inflation, but higher than our average. And same with this year, to try and keep up and also try and stay competitive with our peers in the area. And we've already talked about the health insurance increase. They're listed at the bottom. And now we get to hear from a few other people besides myself regarding some of these staffing requests. The department heads will talk a little bit about, give kind of a summary of what was in the packet. They had the detailed justification memos in the packet, but just give a little bit on that. And Adam's going to just give an update on the patrol officer, which was already sort of pre-approved at the August meeting.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks for approving that early. We were able to lock in our 2 positions, or our 2 officers candidates that we had. Both of them are finishing up some testing this week and are enrolled in Madison College Law Enforcement Academy in January. That's going to be extremely important for us as we move forward and we start to feel the pinch of our people being recruited by all sorts of other agencies, which is happening regularly. Even one of the 2 people that we've hired has been recruited by 2 agencies after we hired them. So that just kind of tells you a little bit of how things are going. And it's going to be important for us to stay on top of our staffing levels. So I just want to say thank you for doing that out of budget time. It was a unique circumstance, but very appreciated.
You're gonna let Chief off the hook with just that? I know you're.
Are we supposed to be asking questions now?
You can ask
yeah.
questions now or later or in between.
Chair, have a preference.
Sorry.
I'm okay with. Yeah, I'm okay with now from a finance standpoint.
Okay with that, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, happy to have voted for that, knowing the issues with labor. And I know that your negotiations are currently ongoing, so you may tell me you can't answer this question, but is there any plans or attempts to work with the union to do something equivalent to what the sheriff's office is doing with about, if you need to do future recruitment, being able to bring in people at a higher wage so they're not starting at the beginning? I can't remember the exact term, but off the top of my head.
Yeah, I think the sheriff's office is doing some pretty deep approaches towards keeping their officers, and they're obviously in a different place than we are and how many people short they are. I don't know that the village would be able to compete with the wages and things like that they're throwing out there, and nothing against them. They're trying to solve a problem that, you know, the best way that they know how. I think there's some challenges to their approach where you see a lot of people leaving at the end of their careers trying to get their 3 highest years. And 3 years from now, they may or may not be dealing with the same problem. And I don't know that that's a very sustainable approach for the village really. So, but those are certainly conversations that we have on a regular basis. That's part of the union negotiations and staying competitive in our pay and our benefits. And those are the things that we're working through.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to talk about a couple of the couple newly created positions this year. And before, I usually say this to the end, but I just want to say that we're really fortunate to have Renee in her role as finance director. She is really good at what she does. More so though, I can tell you, and I've probably seen it more this year than any other year, she cares about this stuff. Any one number, if it's out of whack or out of line, and like her face turns a slightly different shade until she's got this thing figured out. But I'm really thankful for her, and we all should be here in the organization. She does a great job. So 2 new positions, the justification memos and the job descriptions were included in your packet. I'll start by discussing the communications manager position that's on page 89 in the packet. The purpose for this position really is one out of observation for what has been a complicated and challenging mix of roles for our deputy administrator position. While it has worked in the past, the complexity and changes in organization and growth of our organization is causing the role of deputy / communications manager / HR manager / IT manager to be, we cannot continue. Jared cannot continue and be effectively successful at all of those roles. What we're seeing in organizations like ours is some of those positions taking full-time roles, whether it's the HR manager in some organizations or communications / social media manager in others. What I'm proposing tonight is to separate off the communications manager duties from the deputy administrator position to create a full-time, full position dedicated to communications. The possibilities with a talented individual in that role seem somewhat endless with the way technology has brought forward those opportunities, and frankly, the desire and need for us to be effective communicators with the community. So my memo laid out a number of reasons why I see a full-time communications manager serving us really well. And frankly, I want to be clear that this would be of service to every department within our village. And I would take it a step further to suggest that a person in this position could effectively be supporting other organizations within our community by virtue of what they're going to be able to do in communicating to the public. I'm proposing a start date of March 1st of next year. That would be a kickoff on a recruitment right at the start of the year. I laid out the salary and benefit impact for the position. I based these figures on what we see, what we found for communication position salaries in other communities like ours and other competing organizations like ours. So with that, I'll pause, and I feel bad that Sam's not here because Sam's been talking to me for about a year now. And I don't want to put words in my mouth, but I tossed a draft job description that I found from the city of Middleton to Sam about 6 months ago. And he's like, yes, that's it. That's what we need. Hopefully he'll be here at our next meeting to share more and show his support. What is happening for Jared in his role, minus communications, is really the ability to focus and address HR. The regulation is complex, and we are in an organization increasing in size in terms of employment. And you might think about our 90 or so regular employees, but there's several hundred part-time and temporary employees that all are processed through and worked with through our HR department. So we're becoming a complex organization that way. So he'll continue to fulfill that role. And I'll tell you right now, his job description has one line in it about IT management. One line, like one single sentence. And that is a failing description of the work that's been involved in IT management in our organization. Everything from managing the phone system, creating new phone numbers, getting employees assigned to the right phone number, to plugging things in under desks as necessary, all the way up to coordinating with our IT service provider, full-blown server replacements, and not bad at running our meetings at the same time. So he's going to be filling out his role very much more effectively than he can now with also the communications title on board. So that's what's proposed and my reasons why I'm recommending it. And I'll pause there to take questions on the comms manager position.
Nila?
My question is pertaining to space, and we're remodeling our facility. So I'm just wondering if we will have adequate space to add this position.
That's a really good question. And you might have noticed in the justification memo, this is probably the one position that lends itself particularly well to being hybrid/remote. By design, because what I would hope for in our communications manager is that they are going to spend time at every work site with every department, engaging them and communicating their stories. Also, in the world of communications, a really powerful cell phone can do, in the hand of the right person, can do almost everything you need to do. So again, I do not anticipate this position having a permanent in-place office at any one department. I'd enable this position to be hybrid with remote potential and then on-site at every site, if that makes sense. It's a departure from what we're used to, no doubt. But as is this position, taking it to kind of to a new place for us.
I'm happy to see this proposed. I think that we have grown as a village, the need for communicating with the public, keeping up, not just with telling our story and the story of our various departments, but also on those occasions when we do have a lot of social media activity. You can see how it takes time away from other essential activities at Village Hall and other parts of the organization to answer and communicate quickly with the public. And so I'm really excited to see this come forward.
All right. Any other questions or comments?
Two things. One, I want to echo what Kristen said, because if you look at the difference with the school district before they hired their communications director and then after, it's night and day with how they communicate with the public. And I think that that's only a positive for us. It's one that we need. We're getting too big. We've had too many instances where something happens and then other people take it upon themselves to incorrectly state what's happening. And then, as we all know, it takes a lot more to undo a lie than to tell the truth. You mentioned something, Todd, that I found intriguing. I just wanted to know if you could talk a little bit more on it. You had mentioned that this person might be able to do some work with outside organizations. What do you mean by that? Like, how do you envision that?
Well, there's a lot of organizations where we collaborate, partner, and as I like to say, as any of us do well, it reflects and impacts others. So to the extent that we can engage with the food pantry, the Waunakee Neighborhood Connection, our school district, the Chamber of Commerce, I can probably rattle off a couple others, even talking about our organizations that promote events, Oktoberfest, WanaFest. I see this person who can be an effective an official engager on behalf of the village to help those organizations succeed with their messaging at the same time we are. So I'm expecting that a communications manager will also bring a skill to our organization that we really don't specifically have right now, and that could be of grant writer support. Grant writing is the art of telling a story effectively, telling a message effectively. And I am hopeful that this person could not only help us, but then other organizations in collaborative grantsmanship. Does that answer your question?
It does. I feel like we would just need to have a little bit of caution that they don't end up becoming somebody, another organization's PR person inadvertently if we really, if somebody really likes them. I'm not saying that that's going to happen. I just think, what's the, I can't say that in public. That's not appropriate. I was gonna say something about paved with good intentions. I think the rest of that one. So that's all I worry about is I just want to make sure that there's not any organization feels that like, oh, I can just call the village and they can do my PR as opposed to, because this is kind of an expensive position for what it does. But I want to reinforce though, I'm wholly in support of it. I worry if there's one thing that keeps me up at night, it's if Jared is the only person doing IT and HR, those are like the two highest risk areas, probably because we're like one ransomware attack away from having a bad day. And if it's just Jared and our outsourced IT person, that's going to be a really bad day. So I worry that he's done enough time to pay attention and do this job. So please separate it out.
It's 100 inclusive of benefits, right? So benefits comes out of that.
Correct. That number is inclusive of benefits.
Yeah. Surprisingly, that's what they're going for nowadays for undergrads. Yeah.
All right.
Joe,
Yeah, go ahead.
I just to add one thing that's actually in here is that I think consideration is being given, Todd, to using this person in emergency situations and also to deal with police, fire, EMS, to assist them in getting the word out about things. At least that's what I saw. And that's key. That's also important too, because when they're trying to deal with an emergency, sometimes it gets difficult. Who are we working through? And this will really help with that for all of the communities around here. So it's a great idea.
I definitely want to share though that that's not to take away from what our strategically built-in communications procedures in emergency services. There's some very strict, meaningful, specific roles that are played. I don't want those organizations to feel like this is someone coming in to chew away at that, but only to supplement and support.
Yeah, and
to the
work
extent that they
into
can.
those roles as they become necessary. So great idea.
Appreciate it.
All right. Any others? No. Okay, then we'll move on to Bill.
And Bill and I are gonna take, Bill, you can join me on this too, because it's gonna relate. This position, another new position called Buildings and Facilities Manager, is one that would report as part of the management team to the Public Works Director. Maybe before Bill takes some time to talk about the sort of duties that would be assigned to this person, let me share that the evolution of the village departmental managers to being ready to propose this position is one that has evolved over probably 5 or 6 years. We've been talking about this for quite a while. We've been imagining it for quite a while. And as we've seen the addition of facilities and the needed care for facilities, add in the library, now add in a building that we own but lease out to two users in the nonprofits that will have a use on those buildings, sometimes to some surprising buildings that we also own but aren't known. The fire department is a village-owned building. The Chamber Depot is a village-owned building. And we've hit a pressure point where Bill and his crews, along with the assigned staff that we have at a couple of the buildings, the library and the village center, can only accomplish so much with our growing infrastructure. And the job description that you see here and the reasons for this position is a discussion that's come out of engagement with all of the facility managers who see and feel the impact of the buildings on a daily basis. I like to say that we need our police chiefing, not spending half a day figuring out why the HVAC isn't working. And that's what Adam has faced. And the same is true for others in our other facilities. That's the reality of what we've faced. So Bill, is there anything you want to add about the roles and functions for this position?
No, I think the job description and the letter in the packet pretty much explains everything that we're looking to do. Like I say, hoping with this position, we can take better care of our buildings, whether it be the roofs, windows, doors, whatever. So
the other thing I'll add is that again, 2 of the buildings have professional staff supplemented by some part-time staff to help care for the buildings, the village center and the library. You can actually, you see the care carried out. The other buildings is a tag team approach with folks from those other two buildings plus staff from Public Works. We see this position being able to add time back to our existing staff who are otherwise having to drop things to address mechanical or urgent needs in building management. I would say, and I think my department heads would agree, if we have a single wish, an extra wish out of our budget that isn't represented here, if we could get a little more money, we would move up the hiring of this position to earlier in the year. We kind of say that because in a lot of ways, this person's going to be building out this relatively new area of focus and attention for the organization. And we expect that there's going to be some unique, creative, important proposals for 2025 as this function kind of starts to become really clear to the right person. And we kind of want them to be able to effectively propose programmatic changes for us all. This is 7/1 starting date is right at the moment we kick off budgeting process. So that feels tight to us. If you were to ask us what one wish is, at least I would tell you an earlier start date on that position would be very meaningful.
All right. Any questions or comments? Start down this end.
So to the rest of the board, when we did, I think Tricia and I both got to do the tour at the beginning, and I wrote down, I probably wrote this down, like every building that I stopped at, that this was something that was being asked for. In fact, I was really excited when I saw this in here because I was going to suggest, can we do something about this anyway? So I think it's great that it's in here. I would almost say that if we can, might make some people upset, if we can find a way to expedite this. I mean, this is really low hanging fruit for the village to make a massive improvement because, yeah, we have people going around in weird process, as was explained to me when I was doing the introduction. So I mean, I think everybody's unified in the staff level on this. And it would be important for cutting down a huge inefficiency that we have now. So I kind of agree with the wish that if they can move it up, if there's a way we can do that, this would be it.
All right.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. How much would we need to find in order to do that?
A full annual impact on this position, it looks like is 101,000 a year. So, do the math. 25,000 brings us, perhaps brings us closer to end of first quarter.
Yeah, that would be more of a 4/1 start date, another 25,000 or so. Probably.
All right. Other questions? Go
Well,
ahead.
what I was going to ask, I think we entered into it, was how soon or how long would it take to get through the process to find someone to take this position?
3 months we can be successful, but at the same time, my staff hears me say it all the time, don't settle just because you feel like you got to get someone hired. We got to get the right person hired. So I think 3 months is the best turnaround to give people adequate time to give announcement at their current job, et cetera.
No, I was just going to say, similar to the communications manager, this is where if other department heads are having to focus and spend their time, when you could have one more of an expert addressing a lot of these issues, while it is an additional cost there, I think that the added time of everybody else to focus on what they're assigned to do kind of outweighs that. Sure.
I would tend to agree. Do you have something else?
No.
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 Oh, okay. Saw the hand on the button. Yeah, the question that I would have is, being that there seems to be at least an appetite to move that up, is there anything that you need from the board to go down that road?
Well, I would suggest getting through the entirety of our budget discussion today, complete
Sure.
questions, and I think we'll have a pause towards the end to discuss any priorities that you want to see us bring forward in a modified proposal at your next meeting.
Perfect. Okay. Then if there's no other questions, we'll move on to the Public Works crew member. I think that's probably Bill.
Yeah, basically, we're looking to add to our current staff. As we've experienced, the village continues to grow. We've had several new subdivisions that have come online as well as getting started. We've added already, since we've added the last person, 10 lane miles of road. So we're just looking to help with upkeeping our current services.
All right. Any questions or comments on that one? Seeing nothing, we move on to the Senior Center Reception Desk Driver Escort Coordinator.
So what I'm asking for is our senior center reception desk driver escort coordinator to go to a full-time position. The senior center's regular hours are Monday through Friday, 8 to 4. And currently that position, she works 8 to 2:30. So when she leaves at 2:30, the phones still ring, people are still calling for rides, and other staff are filling in. So this would greatly help us.
All right. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll move on to the Village Center Assistant Office Manager.
So similar situation here in our office. This is an incremental change in our assistant office manager position. As the village grows, our phone rings more as well. And so we're just trying to add staffing, not only to help with our customer service, but this person in our office currently also supports our recreation programming staff, assisting with getting programs ready and out the door for our customers. So a slight change in her number of hours per week.
All right. Questions or comments on that one?
Just a general comment and going back, Robert mentioned the onboarding tour that we had the privilege of going on when we first started on the board. And I think, a lot of these really aren't maybe surprises so much just because every department head seemed to have a very clear, well thought out plan in coordination with the other divisions and, a testament to Renee and Todd and the team and having such a understood process and everybody looking out in the future as far as this goes. So I think these are all like expected and needed. So.
All right. Any others?
I just want to say, in case anybody was curious, that they created that position, the last one in 2017. So we're talking about the first change in 7 years, to that. Is that right? So.
Sounds right.
Okay. So this is, I mean, it's great that we're only moving up that's all we need after 7 years. I mean, that's a really good value proposition. And I do want to echo, because I was going to jump on the senior center one, but yes, we're have more of a population using the service. So it's really important that we have the all day service. So.
All right. Any others? Seeing none, we move on.
Okay. So still more input from the department heads here. We have some slides for each of them just to give a couple highlights to their budgets.
And you're not a lot of operational change here. You saw an increase in my budget and it relates to the adding in employment in administration and then the things that are in addition to wage and salary, memberships, professional development, training, and the comms person. There is a really good network in Wisconsin. They call them the plate spinners. I don't know why they do that, but there's a group through the League of Municipalities called the plate spinners. And it's all communications people in municipalities across the state and counties. So set that person up for success with those resources. We have felt the pressure and burden of information technology and the expenses. So we have a slight increase in the costs related to dollars above and beyond our general IT services. And then you'll see at an upcoming meeting, we're going to just bring forward to you a proposal to make some changes in how we go about publishing the Horizons newsletter. We're looking to switch to more of an annual guide supplemented with other publications that will be available more notably electronically. So it doesn't take away abilities to make contact with people in the community through other means, but what you've seen, is it the 3 times a year? The 3 times a year horizons, we have experienced a dramatic quality decline in that product, and we knew we had to come up with other solutions near about the same price to be proud of what we're doing and putting out there. So included in the budget is the funding to make the change, but we're going to come at your next meeting to talk about the scope of the change.
I have a question about that one. So is the annual publication then going to still be printed?
Yes, Sue's here and she's been working on it quite a bit too, but we're looking to consider the a once a year printed annual guide that covers all village services mailed to all postal customers. I joke that it's kind of like the thing that you stick behind the wall phone. If you've been around a while, remember your parents had a wall phone and they had like all the most important numbers and it was shoved in this crack behind the wall phone. That's the thing that this is, that we're looking to print, the thing that you don't want to lose, that you want to have available and keep available.
I think I still have my last Waunakee phone book, which is about 6 years old now. So
Anyway, that in a short bit, but there's been a whole lot more thought given to how we're going to transition to a new approach while also making sure that we do good things to be accessible to the community. So stay tuned on that.
I have questions. And this may be not the meeting for it if we're going to get more in depth in the future, but on the information technology expenses, 2 requests. One is, can we, whatever, I don't know how much it's going to cost, hopefully nothing, but getting on-base searchable getting on-base searchable so that we can search through agenda packets. I'm just not sure if it's something we need to pay on-base or if there's something that's just broken. I'm not sure, or if we need to hire somebody to do
We
that
don't need to
briefly.
pay extra, but we are in the midst of an upgrade for that, and that is almost to the point of having the test deck done where we're going to test it for about 3 weeks and then we'll switch over to the final product. So
Okay,
it's coming. and
okay,
it's
very
coming.
sorry then for jumping the gun
Nope.
on that one.
You've said what's become almost a swear word in our building.
Yep, on base.
Yeah.
On base. And the second half is there any chance that we can look into, and I know that Village Board is on the next slide, but this falls under information technology, getting trustee laptops upgraded with at least like basic Office so that if we need to write something like a Word doc or anything like that, I know that the village prefers that we not email ourselves attachments and do everything on these, but if you want to write anything in a Word document or use Excel or anything like that, you can't do that with these now with our current license. So I'm hoping that's a marginal fee that we could look at.
Yep. Yeah, we'll take a look at that. Maybe capacity in our current year budget, we can check. In the least, we can show you what that expense would be for the licensing upgrade.
Okay. It just makes an equity issue if you have a trustee who has access to technology versus someone who doesn't, then they can't write things out, whereas the other person could.
That's a good point.
All right, we'll move on.
And the village board, there's not a lot of change, but this is more a reminder that we do budget each year to afford the opportunity for really any trustee who would like to go and attend a league annual conference or one of their events. So we didn't have any participation this year. It probably was due to schedules and timing. I totally get that too. But just a reminder, and I always send the little pings to you saying, hey, if you're interested, let us know. We'll get it taken care of. So reminder on that. Municipal court, there's no notable change besides typical operational adjustments.
So then on to Carla.
That's me. As far as changes for our office, we are now bringing the animal licensing back in-house. We've been using pet data. We have experienced a few additional complaints in the last year and a half that I've been here. So we're bringing it back in-house to make it a little more customer friendly. It will be an online system, so people are still able to do it from their homes, but take care of it in a little bit more quick manner. That will also go for business licensing and permits. So street use permits, we won't be using paper permits anymore. It'll be much more streamlined. it will give you feedback as to when it's being reviewed. So you know at all times where that process is at. So it's going to be a nicer system. Elections, we will have up to 4 elections. We're hoping for 3, but we could have 4. We haven't had any increases in the election inspectors' wages since 2015. So to stay in line with other communities, there are people that live here in Waunakee and are going and working for other communities that are paying higher wages. So I would like to stay competitive and keep residents working for the community.
One note on the election is, from a budgeting perspective, we are strategic about doing some balanced budgeting over the year. We build up funds to then help pay for these big years while still keeping a relatively flat line on the budget from year to year for elections. We've been doing that for a long time.
And lastly, this has been discussed before, but the assessment contract, we renewed that for 5 years with Associated Appraisal. So that's nothing new. We are going to be doing a couple interim updates instead of, we're doing one every other year throughout this contract, which will keep it a little more level, we hope. That's all I got.
Any questions? On we go.
Okay, Sue for Community Services.
All right, community services. Well, we've got a lot of goodness going on in our department, but not a lot of big requests this year. So really, just some reporting for you. First of all, we recently reviewed and updated all of the fees for everything that happens throughout our department, and the village board approved all of those fee changes a couple months ago, and Renee brought those and Carla brought those to the board. All of our programs that we offer, we cover direct expenses plus some overhead pieces that help cover the cost of the staff that answers the phone and keeping the lights on in the village center. And so we're taking a really close review of all of our program fees and adjusting those as necessary. Village center rental fees, which had not increased since prior to the pandemic, were all reviewed, and adjustments go into place for 2024 rentals, approximately a 10% increase of rental fees across the board. And then our fitness center fees also were reviewed. Increases there were probably between 5% and 8%, depending on which exact fee we're talking about. And I think my last comment on the fee piece is we now have adjusted all of our fees. So we completely across the board for all of our programming have resident and non-resident fees. There were some special circumstances early on where there were some adjustments to that, but now everything that we offer has resident and non-resident fees. And then the second bullet, we started in 2023 with an adjustment to our part-time seasonal pay plan, really in an effort to make sure that we had umpires on the ball diamonds and kids in the playground helping your kids play. And we really very much appreciated the increases that were allowed in that pay plan, and we'll continue to implement that through 2024.
All right, questions?
I'm gonna be a pest. I'm sorry. I have one quick question. On the village center fees, do we have any sort of target like occupancy rate of, how often that gets rented out that we use to figure out those fees, or is it just?
Not so much an occupancy rate, but a balance between hosting our own programs and then offering those spaces to private rentals. So kind of work through that on a daily basis between the senior center, community services programming, and then private rentals. And then we also do a lot of comparison to other facilities that we compete with for baby showers and wedding receptions and those kind of events.
Okay, thank you.
One other question, is parks separate, or would you want to address that here?
I think Parks is on Bill's.
Okay. Then we'll hold off for it. All right, next.
Okay. Tim with community development.
So not a lot of change in, or change from this year. In fact, I think there may be a slight decrease, but two of the items are being amended to reflect current dollars. One of them is the building inspection cost or building inspection services. The other is dollars allocated for ongoing review of amendments to the village ordinance. One of the things we're going to do is carryover for the Century Avenue visioning process. So that's probably the area where we saw the most savings, carryover dollars from 23 to 24. And then the last piece is anticipated increase in room tax revenue from the two lodging operations in the village, those being the Mill as well as the Grand Stay. Todd and I had the opportunity to visit both establishments earlier this year, and the operators of the Mill have said that their occupancy is going very well. The Grand Stay is now, I would say, fully up and running. We don't have occupancy rates yet. I don't know if Renee can talk about the room tax, but we know we're getting room tax again. But anyway, we anticipate much more now that those are online.
I'll just add on to that. So we have not received any room tax yet for the Grand Stay. They did not start having rooms be available until the third quarter. So starting in July. So I'm hoping their deadline is the end of the month to file their third quarter room tax. So we'll kind of start to see where that's going to be at. The Mill, they started for just a small portion of the second quarter. So we just got a little bit of the first Mill room tax in. But I'm guessing now for the third quarter, when they submit that later this month, we'll start to see what that'll bring in. So third quarter, I think, will be more telling than second quarter.
All right, anything for community development? Nope.
Do we have any, because of the room tax revenue, do we have an anticipated ask from the chamber again to make up the difference?
We'll talk about that in a couple more slides.
Oh, sorry.
But good point. But we'll address that shortly.
All right, if nothing else, on to the library.
Okay, we have a nice and boring budget at the library for 2024. It's been an eventful year, so it's nice to be boring. So we got a substantial increase in our county funding. We do receive funding from Dane County based on usage by non-residents, and their funding formula is now taking into consideration the previous 2 years when the new building has really driven circulation of materials up. So we're starting to see the fiscal impacts of that, and that should continue into future years. Other than that, our staffing and other services are remaining unchanged. And then one thing to note that our revenue from room rentals has now completely overtaken any of the years that when we used to charge for overdue fines. It's now completely supplanted that revenue. So it's doing what it's supposed to do.
All right, any questions for the library? Nope. All right, on to police.
Just a couple things to mention here. We're asking to increase our overtime budget by $15,000 to account for growth, additional staffing needs, special events, things of that nature. I don't remember the last time that was raised, but I can tell you that we've only been under our allotted amount one time in the last 5 years. A lot of that is due to major transition, a large use of FMLA time, special events that have now taken more staffing than it once did before. So looking to increase that. Another increase for DaneCom, that's our radio service. My understanding for that is that there was a municipality that was caring for a very important tower that they no longer wish to solely care for. So as a result, that the cost to care for it is now passed on to all the other municipalities as well. So we saw an increase in that. And then seeking an increase in just over $20,000 for our equipment budget line to cover a number of different things. The first, our dictation software, if you remember, we used ARPA funding for a 1.5-year study. That's a talk to text. So as our officers go out and they do reports, they can talk into a microphone, it'll type it on its screen. It saves office person time having to do that. They can see it in real time. So it's going to the district attorney's office after the next day. It's already been reviewed by them and more accurate reporting. There were some minor increases in our schedule and policy programming. as well. And then this also covers an implementation of some village traffic cameras over the last 5 to 8 years, many community meetings. This is a topic that is constantly brought up. These cameras, a company called Flock Cameras, you may have heard of them. The county's been testing them out for a long period of time. They have some license plate reading capabilities, but it's not something that's detecting facial recognition or anything like that. It literally is just reading license plates. We've been able to clear a couple of our cases already off of using the access to other people's cameras. We think it would be a great safety piece for the village. And like I said, we've been asked about this numerous times over the years. So finally found a company that we feel is worth implementation.
I'll pop in here and ask about the remodeling. Is that part of this or is that?
Yes, that's, I think, coming in a later slide, some funding for the construction
Yes.
documents. Yep.
All
Later
right.
slide.
Anything else? Yes, Tom.
There used to be a provision when one government quit funding things that were then had to be picked up by other governments. And I know Danecom is under an agreement, but is that something you've looked at for this? I mean, that's $10,000 for just Waunakee, right? So.
I can look at it. That is the first that I knew what this increase related to, but I think you're talking about perhaps in the levy limit.
Yeah.
Formulas.
Yes.
I'm not sure if this would qualify for that, but it's something I can definitely take a look at.
Okay, and I'm sure probably other communities that have had to pay this are looking at that too, so maybe it's worth
Right.
calling another treasurer or something. Anyway, just thought I'd bring it up.
Good point.
All right. Anything else? On to Public Works.
Okay, a lot of our increases just for supplies as we use them throughout the various places in town. The biggest thing that even though Jeff and Ryan who are here tonight do a great job of de-icing roads and that for us in the winter, we really haven't had an increase in our salt use. It's just that the price that the state charges now actually went up like 9%. Traffic paint, we're kind of running the same thing as well as fertilizer. Those items seem to be hard to get. When they get them, their prices have increased a lot. And so that's what we're seeing the biggest increase. Stormwater with the engineering department. In 2025, we're looking to start looking at dredging a few of our retention ponds. And so next year, we're looking to try to get started on developing a plan on how we're going to approach those ponds as we start in 2025.
All right. Any questions? Nope. All right. Senior Services.
This year, we've seen an increase in our room rentals. That was unexpected. And I expect that will continue next year. We've added some services that pay us. And also our donations have gone up quite a bit this past year, and I anticipate that will continue. We do have about a $10,000 increase for our shared part of what we pay the village center for our facility. And then there's just a few minor increases elsewhere.
Okay. Any questions for the Senior Services? Nope. Then we're on to Finance.
Okay, so not a lot of change in the finance budget. I did just want to note in 2024, we will have our deputy finance director in place for the full year. That's been working out really well. She's being trained on lots of different areas. As things come up, she helped a lot with the budget process and compiling the budget and preparing for this evening. So we will have that full year impact next year. And then otherwise, just a few minor increases. Again, just rates going up or maybe conference fees just going up a little bit for inflation. So nothing too much in finance.
All right, questions? Nope. Let's go on to EMS.
Just push it once. Push it once again. Stop pushing.
So left-handed.
Hey, there it goes. I think we got it fixed. Sorry about that. We don't have an IT guy. So, EMS, for those of you that weren't around during budget season last go round, at the beginning of 2023, we implemented a second full-time career staff paramedic ambulance. That was a huge lift. And what the EMS commission did at the time is elected to use reserves to spread that cost across 2 years. So we paid half of that cost last year for the 2023 budget. And now this is the second half of that cost, which accounts for the majority of the large increase that you guys are seeing. A little tidbit, it is definitely working out. We've seen now actually 363 times this year that we've had the need for 2 ambulances at once, that we've been able to cover that. So we're definitely getting our money's worth out of this, which is great. Let's see here. The lines of note as far as the rest of the costs go, the ambulance price increases. So our last ambulances we locked in at the end of 2019 were just over $300,000 a piece. And the ones that we locked in actually back in March, we locked in at $415,000. And that was taking a lot of the bells and whistles out. So we went down to kind of a bare bones truck, and that's as low as we could get it. So that's where you're seeing the increase as far as that goes. And then like everybody else, we got health insurance and pensions that are increasing. We're up to 14 full-time employees now. So that does have a pretty big impact. Even the smaller percentages do. And then lastly, a little bit of good news. We are seeing some increased revenue this year, not only with the increase in call volume that we're picking up, but also as far as some new rate increases the commission put into play last year. As of now, we're on track to hit just over 1.1 million in run revenue to help offset the budget. And so then that just directly impacts what the assessments are back to the municipalities. Next year, it's a bit of an unknown. There's a new Act 228 coming out. We call it the Wisconsin GEMT program. It's for Medicaid reimbursements, where the state of Wisconsin has approved that come the first quarter and a half, depending on how quick they get the paperwork out, we're going to see what I call a true up as far as where our actual cost per call versus Medicaid reimbursement falls short for all of our Medicaid patients. We don't know how much of a full true up it's going to be, but we are going to be seeing some extra revenue there. So, any questions?
I joked with Scott I was going to be his hype man a little bit here, but he and Administrator Grosskopf from Town of Westport just finished up with negotiations with the union, and the negotiation that came out, it hasn't been signed yet, but I can talk publicly. I confirmed this, that their increase for salary next year is actually going to be 0%. So they've done a great job in keeping the costs down on this. What that does mean is that in 2024 and in 2020, I'm sorry, starting in 2025, they're going to hire
25 and 26.
Yeah, 25 and 26. They're going to hire a new employee each year so that they can lower the total number of hours that they have to be on shift. So they're still going to make more money per hour, but they'll just, and then they can take part-time in other places. So I think they did a great job on negotiation, and they went a long way, because the original budget had, I believe, a 6% increase penciled in there. So they really did a great job on keeping these prices under control.
All right. Any others? No. All righty. We'll move on to fire.
The fire district budget has not increased this year from last year. We do have a couple small increases. You'll see 60% increase on vehicle maintenance. The fire department used a volunteer mechanic. That is also the same person who is the village of Waunakee's mechanic. So we are now contracting with the village for our maintenance of our fire trucks, and we can all do all that stuff in-house. We have the equipment right there. 300,000 towards truck replacement. That is not an increase. That is the number we've continued, but because it's a significant number, we want to make sure we point that out. And then obviously, not obviously, the newest truck we were planning on purchasing is our new squad truck. And current squad truck has hydraulic tools for extrication. And we are moving towards everything battery operated. So we want to increase the line item of our extrication tool. So when this new truck arrives, we will be able to replace it with new tools. Any questions for fire?
No, but I will say, having used the battery powered extrication tools, they're pretty slick
They are pretty slick.
and also rather heavy.
Everything's heavy.
All right. Well, with that, the summary of policy for unassigned fund balance.
Okay, back to some of the more boring aspects of the budget. Glad we got to hear from the departments. That's more of the fun stuff. So I think most people are aware, certainly we've talked about it recently at the village board level, that our policy is to maintain between 20 and 25% of the next year's operating budget in our unassigned fund balance. I did not mention this earlier, but we, at our last village board meeting, the village board did discuss this policy and also a discussion of whether another policy would be needed, perhaps regarding spending of that excess. And the village board considered it, but they ultimately took no action to change this policy or to create a different policy or even direct the finance committee to work on any other policy or guidelines. So for now, we are staying the same as we have been. At the lower part of the slide, it kind of shows you the recent history. We did have some fairly high years, as I believe I mentioned at last time's village board meeting. Some of that related to as TIF district number 5, the downtown district, started repaying the general fund at a very rapid rate as they started to come out of the deficit position that they had been in. So that moved some fund balance from assigned to unassigned, that raised up the percentage somewhat temporarily. We're now seeing a more leveling off. In 2022, we were at 28%. And as I mentioned before, looking at 2023 to be closer to 26%. And as we'll see on the next slide, projecting 2024 to be right at the top of the policy at 25%. So we're balancing that part out. So here we show some of the strategic use of our fund balance to help balance the budget. Without this use of fund balance, our assessed rate would be much higher, and it would probably double the impact for the taxpayers. So again, we always look at ways to use fund balance in an appropriate way or for the purposes that it was originally set aside for. So we talked a little bit before about using that 150,000 of our 200,000 set aside for that joint venture stabilization, again, to soften that impact of the second year of the staffing of that second ambulance. And then hopefully future years for our joint ventures will be a little more level, or at least not quite so dramatic. We also plan to use some of our carryover funds. So we have previously set aside money for retirees' conversion of their sick leave. So we calculate our anticipated retirees, and then we apply the fund balance that's been set aside to make those sick leave conversions, which is a deposit into an HRA account for those retirees. We also had some money carried over from our assessment. So some of it was used this year when we did the interim market study, but we still have some more carryover. And now that we're going to our new contract, where that'll be a level amount every year, and it's already built in when we'll do those market adjustments, we're going to apply some of that assessment carry over this year, and then we'll still have some that we can apply next year to help ease that change in. And then as Todd alluded to before, we try and budget fairly level for elections, and then we apply more of that carryover fund balance in a presidential year, so that, you know, we don't have big ups and downs over the years for elections. We also have built in currently to apply 75,000 of fund balance strictly for tax relief to help bring down that tax rate for the taxpayers. So again, the total projected use of fund balance is about 475,000 to help offset some of those increases. And then again, looking that we'd be closer to 25% at the end of next year in relation to our policy. So a couple things that I said we'd be talking about in a future slide, they're on here. So 2024 will be the final year that we can use our ARPA dollars from the American Rescue Plan. And obviously we want to spend those fully. So these are projections right now. You know, if we, because not all of our 2023 projects are done, to see exactly where we'll be at and how much we have to use. But in terms of what hasn't been earmarked so far in 2023, we're going to have probably close to 300,000 to use next year. So this is what we're proposing at this point, that phase 3 of the police department addition could be funded out of ARPA funds. Again, that was in 2024, looking at getting the plans and the bid documents and everything ready for a 2025 bidding and build. So we would fund this phase 3. Phase 1 and phase 2 have also been funded out of ARPA dollars. So that made a lot of sense to keep going with that. And then right now I've earmarked the full 10,000 for the chamber. Again, we have seen a little bit of room tax so far. I'm hoping by the end of the year, we'll have a more significant amount and we won't have to use a full 10,000 to make that annual payment. And then going forward, we had talked about, obviously the ARPA funds won't be there, but we hope that the room tax will be there in future years to continue to make this payment. And then just looking at some other possibilities, we considered or have on here to fund some of the Centennial Park improvements that would be both the accessible playground and or the splash pad, using some ARPA dollars to help, with some of the funding gap that was there. So again, I'll be monitoring this year throughout next year, just to make sure we maximize and we don't have to pay back any of the funds. But we can use it on a variety of things. So if we have to, we'll just spend it so we don't lose it. Did you want to make a comment?
Well, I was just going to add that as a reminder, the ARPA funds at the end of 2024, we can't allocate it to some future use. The dollars have to be spent or returned. So that's why we looked at this. When Renee mentioned to me, that was just last week or something, we were talking, and she said, Todd, we have, it looks like $150,000 unaccounted for, undesignated. And you can elect other uses, understand, but I said, boy, Centennial Park just seems to make a whole lot of sense. It's a project that will benefit the entire community. It doesn't, it's designed as a play and an option for all, and in particularly for those in our community who have special needs as well. So this was just Todd talking in suggesting the 150 to the Centennial Park project. So we're definitely open to discussing other potential uses or ideas that you might have.
Just to clarify, we don't need to make any sort of decision on that tonight or even as part of the budget specifically, correct?
Right. I mean, this would be in the budget, but it wouldn't be something that you couldn't take a future action to reallocate.
Okay.
Right. Certainly, we could get something different into the budget, or even if it was approved in the budget as is, we can do an amendment and reallocate it to some other item that might come to the surface.
Okay.
Okay. Just sort of a snapshot here of our debt service policies and where we're at, and kind of a nice graphic that helps show our capacity versus where our borrowings have been. So a reminder that our policy is to remain below 50% of the state limit, which is 5% of our total equalized value. At the end of 2023, we'll just be at around 21%. Our plan is to do another borrowing, and a fairly significant borrowing with the police department addition next year. So that'll go up, but again, we'll be well within our policy for that, even after that borrowing. Another policy is to keep our debt service expenditures below 30% of the total village expenditures. And we're very low on that at 15%. And you can kind of see that in the sort of the bottom layer, the darker pink. We really try and keep our debt service pretty level. And obviously our village expenditures as a whole are going up. So we're keeping a level expense of our debt service versus the whole rest of the village expenditures. So that's why we continue to go down in that particular metric. And then kind of similar, keeping that equalized tax rate below $2.25 per thousand. And we're well under that limit, as we have been for recent years. This slide kind of depicts our 5-year equipment replacement plan. So this year, we talked a bit about this at the finance committee already, but we want to try something a little bit different with our equipment replacement. Some departments, particularly police and public works, who order a lot of vehicles and large equipment like dump trucks, have experienced challenges getting those things ordered and then received when we need them. So we are proposing that we would adopt a rolling 5-year equipment replacement plan so that they could place their orders knowing, say, if it takes 4 years to get a dump truck built out, that they could place the order now and get it when it was needed. Again, this isn't really going to change when we spend the money. It's just getting on the list so that it's available when we actually have it budgeted, which has not always been happening these past few years. There's been some lag in receiving those. So, the further details on all these were in the packet, but this is just kind of a summary over the next 5 years as to what we'd be looking at. Here, we have the capital improvement plan. The reason I showed 2 years in this case, again, in this case, you'll only be adopting the 2024 budget for this, but we do do a 2-year borrowing cycle. So I'm showing both years because that will be what the borrowing is in 2024. Most all of this information was presented at the last meeting when we went through the financial management plan. But just some of our big categories, street improvements. This is increasing from 2023 by 100,000. Just with the increase in the number of projects and the cost of those projects, we felt that should be raised a little bit to keep up with things. Street maintenance has stayed the same. We talked a bit about trails, increasing 15,000 into that pay-as-you-go pot. And then Bill talked about the stormwater pond maintenance coming up in 2025. They're going to start planning for that, but this is where it would start to plug in the capital improvement plan. And they would, come up with a plan on which ponds would be maintained going out. It's all part of the 10-year plan that we have. Park improvements. So the reason 2024 is a bit higher than normal. Again, we've got the Centennial Park playground and splash pad plugged into 2024. And similarly, the next line for building improvements, that's the police department addition, which would be built out in 2025. And then Village Center, they have a pretty stable budget for their capital improvements. And then we just have our total equipment budget, which corresponds to the previous slide. But then we show what funding sources we have to offset. So we have, again, a lot of those pay-as-you-go funds for capital and equipment that we would put toward these projects. And then the Village Center has their own reserve that they use for their replacements. And that gets down to what we would need to borrow for the 2-year cycle. Further broken down on this next slide. Again, we borrow about half of the street improvements. Now a little bit more than half will be borrowed. We will borrow for the pond maintenance, the police addition, and again, the quite a bit of the splash pad, accessible park, plus some other park improvements that are in there, just normal replacements at various parks that are in the parks plan. So this would be our 2-year borrowing amount. Anything there? No, Todd, we didn't talk about this. Usually you take this slide just for fun.
If you squint, no, we like to show you every year where we sit with respect to the equalized tax rate within Dane County for cities and villages. Renee talked earlier about kind of how the equalized tax rate factors in a number of categories to put us on par with other communities, representing that we're sort of similarly valued. It relates to our assessments, correct, Renee? And kind of demonstrates as best we can apples and apples between communities. We've rested pretty squarely in the lower quarter, if not lower third. You can see that if we look at 2022, what we're proposing for our rate takes us very near the bottom of the list within the bottom 5 communities, cities and villages. Now that doesn't take into account changes that might occur with other communities in our county. Changes might happen there that would put us in a different position, but I think it's fair to say that we remain in the bottom quarter very easily with this proposed budget.
Thanks, Todd. Just some acknowledgements here. I want to acknowledge the staff that helped me in my finance department, all the department heads, Todd, the whole management team that we're collaborating throughout this process. People are fine-tuning things as they get more information, just so thanks to all of them for their help throughout. And then, of course, President Runge, who this is her first time leading the village board through this process, but it was great to meet with her and get her impact as well.
I already gave Renee props, but to the management team, I'll share that the act of budgeting and planning never starts and never stops. It is continual. And I know the management team is in a constant process of monitoring their current budget and thinking and planning for not just next year's budget, but many down the road for how to be prepared to serve our community. So kudos to the managers in each department for doing the job they do.
Yep, thanks for that. So now is a time for further discussion, questions that have come up throughout that you or just newly thought of questions. We're happy to answer any of them. We've still got everybody here. Just to go over our rule of thumb, every $10,000 change in the levy increases the tax rate just a fraction. It's a 0.07% change or $1 for the average home. And then just a reminder that until we know that manufacturing assessment, we can't be certain on what the tax rate is, but you know, again, we'll keep refining things as we go and get more information. But happy to answer any other questions that anybody has.
All right, we'll start on this end. Sarah? Okay. Nope. Tom?
You asked if someone had something to say. I thought you were being facetious about me having something to say. I just, this staff and the department heads and these intergovernmental safety departments that you deal with are fantastic. They're just, we're a very lucky community. And the decisions that you guys have made over the last couple of years too have been great. This is a good budget, and I have no problem with it, except I think that what I heard is to try and make an adjustment for a couple of months for that facilities manager, perhaps to get them on sooner. That was the only thing that I heard that anybody was really concerned about at all. It shows that we're a growing community. There's no doubt about that, but good job. And, you know, I didn't see the legal budget in there, but I'm sure it's very. So, and thank you very much for letting us sit in on this too. It's been interesting. We've been glad to be here. So thank you. You should move with that changes. I'm fine with this going to public hearing, certainly.
Excellent. Thank you.
To echo, I want to thank staff for great work and the intergovernmental cooperation that we've had with fire and EMS. Very easy to follow. I do budgeting for my day job, and it's a miserable process. So this is actually way better than what I do at work. And I want to also thank citizen members, since this is a 2-hour meeting and probably not the most exciting meeting that you've said. Yes, it's almost 2 hours. And those who've attended as well in the audience. I do want to kind of put out there just as a curiosity. So I'm not asking for anything specific, but we're going to discuss something later tonight about, doing TID to pay for improvements to the road. I'm kind of curious if it's possible to learn, what an impact would be if we finance those types of things, by borrowing as opposed to going through a TID process to do improvements. Just not making any official requests. Just want to know, like what that would look like budgetarily. So,
I can work on something for that. I don't have that prepared. Yeah. Yes, I'd have to get more information and probably work with Todd Taves on at Ellers on what that borrowing would do for the village.
Okay.
Exactly. I think we have some general information for tonight, but yeah, I can look at that.
Because if there's one citizen question I get, it's, why do we finance this through TID as opposed to, financing it through borrowing? So I think it would just help for us to understand that better.
And we do, Todd Taves is with us tonight. He's going to be part of our conversation later on the agenda. So there might be some context you can add right away.
Okay, and I don't want to put anybody on the spot. That's what I was saying for the future, just to understand.
Excellent. Okay. Kristen?
I want to thank you all for coming here tonight and talking about the budget needs. I thank you very much, Todd and Renee, for all of the work that you put into this and the department heads. I think this is true of all of us that came onto the board when we toured this past spring, everyone talked about the needs of their department in the context of the needs of the residents. And there is an incredible amount of value built into this budget. And you've done such a great job of focusing on what your department needs to serve the community better. And I thank you all for that very much. That's a tough job to do. And there's a lot of work that goes into this. So thank you for the work.
Thanks, Kristen. Sorry, I forgot you and I lumped that in the tours. No, I just reiterating what I said earlier. I think in going through the 100-some pages of detail in the budget, I was not that I expected to have questions, but was pleasantly surprised with the lack of questions that I had. And I think a lot of that has been just the detail that's been provided and the transparency up to this point. There were really no surprises or anything unexpected or any questions because of the thoughtfulness that's gone in and the amount of information that's been given to the board up to this point. So good job.
Thank you to all the department heads for working hard to come up with a budget, to the staff. But I would also like to have all of you go to your offices tomorrow or your buildings where you work and tell all of the people that you work with, thank you, because we have great employees in the village and I am thankful for that every day.
All right, having come back here, I'll summarize by just saying ditto. That pretty well covers everything that's been said. So with that, I think where we're at is basically that we need to take action. Basically, that action should probably come from the board versus the finance committee. So I will turn that portion over to you.
I would move to direct staff. Are you looking for a motion?
I think yes, Joe is looking for a motion.
Well, it should probably be a board motion.
All right.
Yep.
Yes. So do we have a motion?
I would move to direct staff to publish the notice as required by state statute that indicates that the proposed budget is available for public review and schedule the public hearing for November 20th and an optional public hearing for November 6th. Did I get the date right?
Yes, that's correct.
Down there.
Right, do we have a second?
Second.
All right. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstention? Motion carries. Thank you all very much for the time and energy and effort. Thank you very much, Sarah and Tom, for coming here tonight and spending the 2 hours with us, and board for all the thoughtful questions.
We do need one additional motion.
I move that the finance committee adjourn.
I second.
I'll give Robert the second. All right, so to adjourn, all those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, finance committee is now adjourned. In the realm of the board, I'm actually going to make a motion to take a 5-minute recess.
Second.
Oh, all in favor? Aye. All right, opposed? Thank you so much. All right. So we are back. All right, next item on the agenda, consent agenda. Does anyone have anything they'd like pulled?
I'll move to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second it.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We'll skip over, now reports next. So next item on the agenda then is reports. Parks and Rec.
I'll take that one tonight in Sam's absence. So two primary items on the Park and Rec Committee agenda last week or 2 weeks ago. First was another work session from the Architecture and Planning Group on the splash pad and the accessible park design in Centennial Park. I think good feedback from the community, and it was clear that the team, Sue and her team, as well as Architecture, really took some of the feedback and guidance and thoughts, whether it was related to design or layout of the park itself, into consideration. And so making progress there. Next step is they will be looking at the actual equipment design. Correct, Sue? Call me out wrong. And the second, Phil Wilhelm was presenting a donation and proposed donation of lighting for the Village Center and the Village Park main shelter. That those lights would be able, like LED lights, and I think that Phil's here if anybody has any questions or wants to see the example. That would be able to be lit in conjunction with the Rotary's holiday lights, as well as different times throughout the year. And so that will be coming before the board, I believe, at our next meeting. It was recommended unanimously by the Park and Rec Committee that the village board approve or accept that donation.
All right, thank you very much. Next up is Public Works Committee.
Public Works, Bill and his crew are as busy as ever. Anyone driving through Waunakee can see that we've had road projects that have finished up. North Division Street is going through. I started to wonder if that was going to happen or not because it was getting so late in the season, but they're working on that. Pretty soon they will be doing leaf pickup. And I'm sure they can't wait until the snow starts. So thanks, Bill, for everything you guys do.
Leaf reminder, right, Nila? Do not sweep your leaves into the street.
Yeah. They end up in the lake. Yeah.
They go into the lake.
Yes. Yeah.
Bill, do you have any other important announcements on that? I know that's quite a program that takes your guys some serious work. There's some good reminders that makes that task a lot easier if everybody follows them.
Yeah, they just keep them at the curb, or not in the curb, but to the curb and then out of bags and away from the mailboxes and trees would be great as well. For when we come through and pick them up.
All right.
I always feel like a kid as they come through and do this. I'm like,
I
oh, that's
see.
just so cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Want to join us?
Oh, I totally would. Yeah.
Can we do ride-alongs, kind of like police?
I'm sure we could arrange something.
Yeah.
All right, next up is Plan Commission, and I'll give that report. We had three things that we discussed. We discussed the potential ordinance allowing chickens, and that was a robust discussion. We began the discussion on the sign ordinance and updating that, and we also began the discussion on updating parking regulations across the community. The last two of those are rather lengthy discussions that'll probably take course over the length of a couple of months at least, because they're pretty elaborate ordinances and a lot to think about within those. All right, next up is Joint Plan Commission, and Tim, is that you? Yeah.
Yeah, in this regard, there's not much to report because we haven't had Joint Plan Commission for 3 months, I believe. So next up, November, we will have several items on that agenda.
All right, and Community Development Authority, I can give that, or do you want to give that, Tricia?
I can give that. It's a pretty easy one. We had a single agenda item. Steve Hanrahan, did I say that correctly? From Habitat from Humanity gave a great overview of the Habitat program, but specifically focused on the home rehabilitation program as it may nicely dovetail into our new housing program.
That was really exciting.
Yeah, it was really good.
Yeah. And next up, Create Waunakee Committee. Aaron is not here. Do we have?
Yeah, I can give a quick report. We really celebrated quite a bit about the artisan market event that was just wonderful. Really pleased with how that event went, partnership with Schumacher Farm Park. The several events coming up, including next or this week with Boo Bash in the community, and then Crate Waunakee, which is hosting Trunk or Treat at the overflow parking lot for the library. And I think we have about 30 trunks participating, and a couple village, are there some village departments participating too? So that should be fun. A big event that the Crate Waunakee Inc. is planning is called a Ball of Creativity. It will be, I think for the first time in a long time, a big festival, a gala event to celebrate creativity in our community. We are going to utilize the library in its entirety for this event. So stay tuned. You'll learn more. I believe that date's in February, but I wasn't prepared perfectly tonight. So you'll have to
Did a great job.
get your ball gown ready.
Excellent. And I hear that
tuxedo.
there is Paint the Plow coming up.
Oh, underway. right?
Underway?
Two of the pickup plow blades have been primed, and there's going to be students from the schools. Do we know what their design is yet, Bill? Is that
No, I haven't seen the
Oh.
design, other than I know we've got two pickup plows right now that they've primered white, so they've got like a blank screen there that their design, I think it's 21st. I believe is the date. So when they'll be out there, teachers got a design for it. They're hoping to have a real good success.
Excellent. Excellent. Wonderful. Any other committee reports? Yeah, Robert, you have one.
EMS.
EMS.
Yes, EMS, but last Thursday, it's already discussed during budgeting that they've out for ratification with the union. If you have any questions on that, I can answer it separately. As far as the commission meeting went, we did come to and I don't have copies for everyone because it'll be in next month's meeting, but we do need to approve the changes. This is the first round of changes. This is not going to be the final round of changes. We kind of punted the tougher discussions to later. Something that I learned in that meeting is that some of the towns that participate within the commission do not actually have any sort of formal following of Robert's rules or any sort of rules of debate. And so some of the towns are pushing back against us adopting Robert's Rules of Order into the bylaws. So we're going to have a further discussion on that. And then the granddaddy tough discussion about dissolution of the district, what that would look like if that ever needed to happen. So this is the easy changes that will be in November.
Thank you very much for the work and for the report.
I'll throw one more report in there. Just a
Yes,
real
yeah.
quick, police committee met last week, received a Q3 summary from the chief. Calls were up over the summer, but severity was pretty stable. So that was all good. And they continue to have issues recruiting new staff kind of as it's been ongoing. So.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Good work going on in the village. First item on the business items is discuss and take action on issuance of a municipal revenue obligation and resolution for 100 Baker Street LLC. And I believe that's to you, Tim.
Thanks, Kristen. The materials for this item begin on page 166. Nothing really to show in terms of slides or anything, but so earlier this evening, we mentioned the Mill Hotel. And this item relates to that. So pursuant to the terms of the development agreement with the owners of the property, the village is to issue an MRO associated with the project. Once it's complete, an occupancy permit was issued in August of this year. So we're fulfilling the terms of that development agreement. It's essentially that simple. So the resolution and MRO are both included on the packet, and staff is recommending approval. Oh, by the way, the property owner was able to review and they were fine with the document. So staff is in recommendation of approval.
Do you have any questions or discussions? Yes.
I'd just like to make a comment. When this was brought to the board to be voted on, I voted against it, against the TIF use of funds for this. But I do want to say that I also know that it's important that the village pays its bills and meets their responsibilities. So when I vote for this, I just wanted this comment to have been made so that my vote reflects that. So that if someone sees inconsistencies, they understand where the inconsistency lies.
Right. Thank you, Nyla. Thank you, Nyla. Other comments?
Well, I would just say I absolutely respect Nyla's comments on that. That makes it's
Perfect sense.
very consistent. Yep.
All right. Other comments or questions? If not, then I'll make a motion to approve the resolution authorizing the issuance of the municipal revenue obligation to 100 Baker Street LLC.
Second.
All right. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
I'm
Abstention.
abstaining.
Okay. All right. And so motion carries. All right. Next item on the agenda, discuss and take action on the correction ordinance related to the annexation of 40 acres of land south of and adjacent to the Waunakee Intermediate School on Woodland Drive. And so correction ordinance really sticks out to me, Tim.
Thank you again, Kristen. So you may recall a few months ago, the lands south of the intermediate school were annexed into the village. Since that time, the surveyor for that project notified staff that there was in fact an error in the annexation map. And so we all contacted the Department of Administration as to what to do in this situation. And they recommended that an ordinance reflecting that correction or that error be adopted by the governing body. A possible remedy for situations like this would be something called an affidavit of correction. However, since this reflects a relatively significant amount of property, which is about a half acre, this was the direction given by the Department of Administration. So the adoption of a correction ordinance correcting that original legal description map. And that map itself is found on page 237 of your packet. And the error involves a misidentification of a property corner, which was about a 16-foot difference along the westerly edge. And so that 16-foot error carried throughout the western boundary. And so what this ordinance does is essentially correct that error and or oversight. So staff is recommending approval. This was then domino down to the Kilkenny West plat that was recently approved, so that all the documents would reflect that change.
All right. All right. Comments or questions?
Just,
Oh, go ahead.
okay, just one, and I think the word intended that's used in the staff review kind of maybe answers that, but just to confirm, this original, it was thought that this was part of it. It was just described incorrectly. Is that the case?
Right, it was right. And in fact, it was an error discovered by the survey team on behalf of the developer. And so they brought it to our attention after all the documents were recorded with the Register of Deeds.
And this gets us square?
I'm sorry?
This gets us square?
Yes.
All right. All right, literally, yeah, literally, literally. It's getting late. All right, do we have a motion?
Motion to approve the correction ordinance providing for the correction of the legal description and map of lands located south of the intermediate school originally approved on April 17th, 2023.
I'll second it.
All right, any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Item number 3, discuss and take action on reconsidering no mow may, and I believe this is page 238 of our packet. And is that you,
No, and-
Todd?
Well, this is to facilitate your continued conversation from the last meeting.
All right.
Were you able to bring a speaker or someone to give information?
I've traded calls with our local, entomologist. Dave Hogg, he lives near Kristen, actually.
Yeah.
He's been out of town and we've traded messages. And I'll keep an eye out and see if he did say he was going to email me. Today, he called me back and said he'd try to email us, so I'll check that. I did speak to one person in the community, brought this up. They said that they follow it very closely. What they know about the science is that the practice of mowing your yard low essentially trains the flowering weeds to bloom at lower growth. And this is anecdotal. I'm no expert. I'm simply relaying that the act of growing it tall and then cutting it untrains that skill of the flowering weed or plant, thus creating in the long run fewer blooms in your yard. So I don't know if anybody can tell me whether that's correct or not correct, but it sounds right. But
I would say it's correct.
that sounds right to you too?
Yeah, the more often my yard gets mowed, because I don't put or weed eat anything, the more blooms I do get from like dandelions and clover and that sort of stuff. And the less often it gets, the wild violets, the less often it gets mowed, the dandelions just go into seed and less blooms on everything else.
So I know for those watching online, you didn't hear the audience comment, but there's basically agreement that is the scenario they see.
Sun Prairie, after Todd and I had a discussion about sustainability today that was unrelated to what we're talking about. But after that, I looked on the Sun Prairie website. They actually did a little study of no mow May in their community. And there are some interesting charts and a little survey they did of bees and other pollinators. I am wondering if we might want to wait until Professor Hogg is available and maybe look at, and that we're not Sun Prairie, but I think a lawn here and a lawn there are probably equivalent, and see if we can actually put some data behind our decision.
I agree with that. I would like to make a decision that's based on a lot of information, and I think the board had good intentions when we made the decision, but it was made rather briskly, and I would like to put some information together and be able to make a better decision with information and data.
Bill did provide the board with the information on our weed
Yes.
and mowing complaints that we've seen.
I wanted to make sure I thanked him, even if we don't do anything tonight,
Yeah.
since that was my
Thank you.
request. And I mean, obviously this year is a bit of an outlier, since it's hard to have complaints about growth when there's no growth to be had from the weather.
That's
So, but I mean, it's a very, very, very small sample size. So like if you're into statistics, this is not something you should rely on, but it is interesting to me that the first year that this really was impacted, that we had more complaints than in any other year. So there is probably a little bit of, science behind the fact that we do end up having more issues with it. Although it was more interesting to me that it was July when the weed complaints were in, as opposed to June when no mow May would have ended. So I find that kind of interesting.
But actually, it takes the neighbors that long to get frustrated enough to call at that point after no mow May.
Right. But I mean, it just shows that, you hit the end of no mow May and some people are just like, no mow June too,
No longer.
I will say though, as somebody who kind of practices this a little bit, I can kind of vouch for what was said. I've been kind of experimenting with my yard, much to my neighbor's chagrin probably. And yeah, I go out and manually like pop them out with a weed popper, but I did notice that there was a definite change in the height of what happened when I participated and did that. So it's interesting. I would be curious to see what they say.
I definitely agree that we need more data. It's only October. I think we've got time. So, yeah.
Do we need a motion, I think, to just table this until we have that information available from?
You don't need a motion. Staff can just bring it back when, and it sounds like there's gonna have to be a time to schedule with the one individual when they can actually make a board meeting.
Okay.
Can I make a strange request if we're going to bring in an entomologist? Because I want to make sure it gets noticed properly. And I don't want to get accused of going off of what's noticed. Can we, if we do bring a speaker and an entomologist, can we also talk to him about urban beekeeping?
Yeah. I agree.
Is that okay?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, there was that, I don't know if I forwarded the paper to somebody, to you.
You quoted to me because
Yeah,
I've discussed it in the past, but
Yeah.
I would love to have that conversation before doing anything
Yeah.
with it.
Well, that'd be the right guy to have the conversation, because he does keep his own outside of the village, and his wife makes some pretty good honey. Well, the bees. His wife puts them in a thing. Then yes.
All right. So on to item number 4, discuss and take action on policy related to public improvement funding for proposed for proposed, I cannot say that tonight, TID number 10, the business park / mixed use district. That's on page 240. And that's Tim.
Thanks again, Kristen. So I'll try and summarize this when the information's in your packet, but there's not a lot of support material with this as we're hoping to have a policy discussion by the board. Earlier this year, as you remember, the board did direct staff to move forward with a process to consider the creation of TID 10, and that process began in earnest early this month with the first joint review board meeting at which they heard the first draft of a project plan. And within that project plan, it included a pro forma that included an interest rate accruing at 5.5%. The developers for the project have indicated that rate is not financially viable for private party borrowing and construction to complete the public improvements associated with the proposed TIF district. And as you recall, the two substantial projects within that district or adjacent to it are the extension of Frank H. and then the intersection improvements associated with the Highway 19 and Hogan Road intersection. So staff is looking to have a policy discussion regarding the village board position on borrowing for and constructing the public improvements associated with this TID, as the village would receive more favorable borrowing rate than a private party would. Source for bond repayments would be a combination of increment generation and developer financial guarantees to cover the shortfall, should there be one. So with us this evening is the village's financial advisor, Todd Taves, with Ellers. And in addition, and thanks for staying with us this evening, are two of the developers, Joe Bukovic and Andy Kesnick, are representing the development group that may be available for questions, or if you wish to hear their side of the story. But so staff is really leading that off, and all of those folks that I mentioned are here. But I guess at this point, to lead off the discussion, I guess staff is recommending the board express support for the concept approach to public improvements, wherein the village would borrow for and construct the public improvements. That doesn't mean you'd be approving TID 10 at this evening. It just means that if you choose that route, our financial advisor could then go back and reframe the pro forma included in the project plan. So with that, I guess, I don't know, Todd or Brian or Todd Taves, if any of you wanted to add anything at this point.
I'm not sure who might be best to explain it, but I think it is worth talking about our past history with, in fact, the business park itself and the TIF districts that we created and used to build out the park as we have already. What's proposed here is, in fact, the approach that we used with the original business park. In fact, is it TID 3?
TID 3.
TID 3 that we're on the brink of closing, right? About to close. TID 3 was a project where the village undertook an array of public improvements, but Chuck, not Chuck, Joe was involved in the design of that development as well. MLG issued a letter of credit that the village was able to draw upon if, in fact, the business park increment didn't cover our borrowed repayment requirements. We, in fact, did draw on that letter of credit a number of years at a significant amount. Joe, do you recall what was the maximum amount of draw that we were at?
I believe it was like the maximum letter credit we had was 1.5 million. And it's a little bit over $1 million that was drawn on it.
Yeah, right. So just so folks who are watching, listen, yeah, it might be, is it okay if I bring Joe into the conversation, Kristen? Yeah, the letter was for 1.5. We drew over $1 million. The good news in the end, the district came out in the black by both allowing the village to cover its obligations with repayment to the developer on that letter of credit. But that was the design that worked for us for completion of the business park to date with TID 3. What other context, Joe, did you want to share?
Yeah, just a little bit on that. It sounds like when the village borrowed all the money, that they had to borrow more money from MLG to pay the debt payments. TID 3 was approved in 2006. And we had a couple of developments get started in phase 2 of the Waunakee Business Park. And then we had a multi-generational recession, which halted development for almost a decade. So when you have that kind of hit, you have a TIF that's generally around 20 years. And if the first years are the most important to help it get paid off, because you get your increment for the majority of the time period. And we had a couple developments in the beginning, like I said, and then we had almost a decade of no building. But we were still able to bring that back. 2017, 18, we started having some more interest and then started building up, and it really built out in the last few years. And as Todd and Tim said, the TID is scheduled to close next year with a positive balance, even though it had all those hurdles to overcome in the beginning. So I just want to make sure that getting out of the box, you aren't expecting that you're gonna have to borrow from MLG's letter of credit, but it is there to backfill any deficiencies in tax increment that's collected. And that will not come from any general fund or anything else. It's strictly the developer's risk if the increment isn't created.
Thanks, Joe. I wonder if Todd Taves could jump in. Todd, what other context can you offer about the variation between what's currently in the project plan proposal and this alternative, and how you see those approaches in other communities that you work with?
Yeah, well, obviously when we can make projects happen, when the developers or the property owners are bringing the capital to the table, that's a preferable scenario for the village. It's not always possible, particularly when we're dealing with a situation where the improvements are benefiting multiple property owners, which is the case in this situation. So oftentimes you will see municipal borrowing for some or all of the improvements when it's necessary because we've got multiple property owners. A couple other considerations. One would be that we need to be a little bit cautious about the deal structure, because part of the benefit of the village issuing the debt would be we can do it on a tax exempt basis. So we need to make sure we don't run afoul of any private activity considerations. I don't see where that would be an issue in terms of this particular project, but we want to make sure, in fact, that we can issue the debt on a tax exempt basis. I think the biggest thing, which has been alluded to, is that ultimately these are going to be, if this is the route we go, this will be general obligation debt, meaning that ultimately the village taxpayers are securing it. The intent is obviously that we use the tax increment revenue or security in lieu of that, such as the letter of credit in the TID 3 example, to make sure that we don't actually have to levy these dollars. So that's really a key aspect of the development agreement, is making sure that the benefiting properties are on the hook for their share of the payments, and that we've got an appropriate security in place to collect on that. The other thing I would touch on, and we had provided an update on the financial management plan at the last meeting, and we spent some time talking about the village's credit profile. Whether you're borrowing the debt for a TIP project or for public road improvement or a new building, debt is debt is debt. So this would count against the village's debt burden, as well as the debt limit. And so while one project is not going to, from my point of view, create a credit concern, obviously the village would want to be judicious in terms of, again, deploying its borrowing power only when it felt it was necessary to make a particular project work.
All right, so we discuss. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
If I can just make one more point, there's a large benefit for the village proceeding with borrowing at a lower rate. We started doing this project 2 years ago, started getting the discussions rolling, and then we needed to figure out what are the traffic impacts at Hogan and Highway 19. And we got all the way through that, and there has to be a stop or a street light controlled traffic signal controlled intersection. And in my mind, when we were trying to put it together, how can we formulate a TID plan that helps to fully develop the business park and also provide a virtually risk-free financing alternative for paying for that intersection? That intersection for the village to grow out to the east, that intersection is going to have to be improved. And by borrowing the money at a lower rate, per the project plan that was discussed at the JRB last week or the week before, there is money to finance that intersection that will help the village grow in the future. So it's not just a developer handout, it's a win-win for the developer, the village, stakeholders. So I just want to put that out there for your discussion as well. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks. All right. Tim.
Just wanted to add one other thing, and I think we've talked a little bit about this, but that's timing. As Joe mentioned, the traffic study that was done indicated the need for a certain type of design at that intersection, Hogan and 19. However, as I think we've talked about, we've been in a fairly frequent conversation with the DOT on the timing. As many of you know, that stretch of Main Street or 19 is scheduled for I don't know if it's mill and overlay or some reconditioning, a substantial bit of improvement from Division all the way east to River Road in 2026. And so one of the advantages of getting this question answered is to piggyback on that project, hoping that that will help reduce the cost of those intersection improvements. We have a dollar figure in the pro forma right now, but it's possible, we don't know because we haven't seen the exact dollars yet, and because they won't be known, I guess, until that 2026. But it's possible that the numbers included in the TID pro forma may be lower if we partner with DOT. We have a draft municipal agreement from DOT for the village participation in that. We certainly didn't want to bring that to you until we get this question answered and obligate the village to any of those dollars. But it would seem to make sense that the project, that intersection improvement project be done as part of the DOT rather than wait 2 or 3 or however many short years after that project to essentially rip that up again and do it over. One of the things the DOT indicated to us that it is, as warrants would determine, it may not be necessary to put the signal lights there. However, we could build in for infrastructure such that those could be added later. So that cost piece might not be initial, but it would still be in part of the overall project. But just wanted to point out that timing piece, because I think that's an important piece of the puzzle to consider.
Thank you. All right, what discussion do we have?
I think it's an important piece of the puzzle as well, and that's sort of a what if. What if TID 10 does not get approved? Does that make all of this irrelevant? Is that?
Good question. So I think maybe break it down. I think that the traffic impact analysis demonstrate that improvements are needed at a point in the future, relatively near future, to that intersection. So then the question, if TID 10 doesn't happen, how will that intersection get funded? And that's a great question, because if we don't do it as part of the DOT project, then when will it get done and who funds it? I don't know if I can answer that right now, but those are good questions. Again, from our perspective, to take those into consideration, I think the economy of scale would make sense that the TID, if approved, would help fund that, number one, but number two, also help fund a project at a lower cost to the taxpayers in general. Not just Waunakee, but as part of that DOT project. So I don't know. I mean, perhaps Joe can speak to some of the other pieces. If TID 10 doesn't happen, what are the repercussions? But I think at least to the intersection of 19 and Hogan, they would have major repercussions.
Joe, would you mind?
Yeah, if the TID 10 doesn't get approved, then we don't have many options for developing that property. It costs more than what we can sell it for. Kind of a short answer. I'm speaking for the MLG property. We have Andy Kucinich here that's representing another property in the district. But that's our opinion is it costs more to build it than what we could sell it for, and it wouldn't happen for a long time or ever.
Thank you. And I would assume I'm going to guess, same true.
Yeah, even more so,
Mhm.
because that's being asked to be
Yeah,
in the road.
Please, yeah.
Voice is loud.
Okay. What I said was that the impacts would be even more so for the infrastructure that would need to be on the Stotts property. I represent the Stotts. My name is Andy Kesnick. I'm with the D.L. Evans Company, a local real estate firm. And I was asked by the Stotts to assist them in this process when it started moving their way a couple of years ago. So we've been deep into it now, crunching numbers and looking at all the scenarios. And one of the things that the village is asking for per your comprehensive plan is to see the Stotts property develop with something other than the Stotts implement dealership down the road. That is not something the Stotts are asking for at all. But that is the reality of what your plans call for. And the Stotts acknowledge that that is something that in the long run probably makes sense, because in 1930 they were on Main Street, and about 1970 they had to move because the neighborhood changed. It just didn't work for them or the neighborhood. So now they moved out to the country, or not now they did, but in the 70s they did. And now the neighborhood is caught up to them again. And it's becoming very busy. And in the long run, it's probably not the best place to run an implement dealership when the neighborhoods southwest are growing quickly. And in particular, that intersection we're talking about now, Hogan at 113. I mean, you're talking about pulling out from a dead stop into 55-mile-an-hour traffic. You know, just it's just not a good spot to really run any business. And so these comprehensive plans, the future plans that you have, show an extension of the business park on the Stotts property. For that to happen, you need municipal services out there, which there's not now. They're on a septic system and well. They've been there the whole time they've been there. And quite honestly, they could continue to do that just fine, infinitum. They don't need the municipal services. It's kind of the question, well, what if it doesn't get approved? To continue doing what they are doing for as long as they want to continue that business. But for anything else to come, it has to have the municipal services, sewer, water, all the other related infrastructure. And so really the Stotts family is participating and watching where this goes. They're not looking to redevelop their property at all, particularly the 10 acres. And I should offer that it's a 20-acre property. It's really two 10-acre pieces. And I'm assuming you all are relatively familiar with the properties, you drive by it. The north 10 acres is vacant land. It's farmed. The south 10 acres has their business on it. They could conceivably much easier develop the front 10 acres. And that's why Tim referred to me as a developer. I am not. In the Stotts property, the Stotts family is not developers. So I want to make that distinction that we're here as a 100-year-old business rather than a land developer. No offense to the land developers out there. They do a great job, but that's not who we are. But this is where we find ourselves in this situation. So the front 10 acres, but if you look at it from a physical standpoint, it takes a deep dive. I mean, if I called it a ditch, it would be insulting Mother Nature. It's a ravine, it's deep. And you'd have to go down in it and look up to appreciate how deep it is. But to turn that into anything that would support buildings, you need to bring it up to the elevation of basically the street. And that's a really expensive undertaking. And that's not even covered by the TIF. But what the TIF, we understand, will cover is the public infrastructure, which would be to take this Frank H., which serves all the stuff that his company has developed the land, and all those businesses are out there immediately to the west of our property, and run that Frank H. Street through to get it to Hogan. That goes right through the Stotts property and effectively divides the property in two and consumes about 2 acres. And it's not Todd's numbers, it's the engineer's numbers that you guys hired Strand to help figure out what this would cost. It's multiple millions of dollars to put in the infrastructure across Stotts's property to allow traffic to go past their property. That would also allow them to develop this front 10 acres, which becomes 8 when you put in the public road, and you have that much less to actually develop. But just like you were saying, the front and his numbers, Todd's numbers, have the value of what the Stotts property would be worth after you put in this multi-million-dollar infrastructure, and it's like half of what it costs to make it physically possible. But for the TIF, which was the initial question, the Stotts family will continue doing what they're doing on well and septic, for the next number of decades. I mean, they're already into the 4th generation of the family.
I could see being the 8th generation of the family, I'm making this number up, but 50 years from now, it's the same thing and then watch the village go around them. But there's no way financially that you can do what the village is conceptually thinking about doing on that property without the TIF helping it out.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
Yeah.
you're welcome.
Tim, out of curiosity, if we don't develop this particular portion of the business park, where do we go next? If somebody comes in and wants to build something big?
That's a good question because Brian may
I
want to
can't
weigh in
answer
on that too, in terms of contiguity.
I think it's important that we keep our discussion tonight to the public improvements. I just want to make sure that we do that because that's what's on the agenda. We've gotten a little astray from that. And so I just want to try to bring it back.
I appreciate the reminder. All right. So with that, what questions or discussions do we have, board?
It's just a question on the improvements, but for the all of the properties, if there isn't some sort of financing mechanism, or if STOTS decide not to develop, who pays for those improvements? Do they just happen, or are they like, do they just stop and the road improvements don't happen? Outside of I don't know if that, I don't, Brian, if I'm breaking your rule.
No, I mean, look, we're talking essentially about three things. We're talking about public improvements, how do they get funded, and how are the costs allocated? And at the end of the day, whether the village is the bank or a developer is a bank, we still have to work through all those issues. So one of the things that we talked about was the TID 3. And so when TID 3 was developed, that's how business parks were developed back then. It was municipalities had to spend the money, hope that you generate the increment, get the letter of credit to back it up. Every community that I work in did it exactly that same. Waunakee, Mount Horeb, Verona. So if you're going to do it that way, because communities have tried to get away from that, they try to now do pay-go TIDs as opposed to the municipality being the bank. If the municipality is going to be the bank, and there are certain times where that's probably still justified, you absolutely positively have to get the letter of credit. Not having a letter of credit is a non-starter. In the mid-2010s, I had heard that banks were not issuing letters of credit for TIF obligations. Now, maybe it is back to where it was in the 2000s, but you absolutely positively have to have that letter of credit. Then the question becomes, okay, you're going to get a letter of credit from a developer. How much is that developer? You have multiple property owners that are on this intersection. I find it hard to believe that one developer is going to step up and pay for all of the improvements. So then you're talking about multiple if the village is going to be the bank, you have to have multiple agreements with multiple parties, all of which have a letter of credit. Now, and what we've heard, and this would be, I think, standard that you would hear from developers, is they're not going to provide that letter of credit unless there's a TIF that's been created that's essentially going to provide the increment, with the whole goal being the municipality never has to draw on the letter of credit because there's enough increment that's been generated to pay for the public improvements. So is this potentially a more cost-effective way to do things? I have no question that what Todd and Tim are saying is true, because if you can borrow the money at less than what the developers have to, ultimately the project is going to cost a little bit less money, I think. But you have to have that letter of credit, and the question is going to be what parties are going to be provided, and you need to make sure that it covers all of the borrowing. And the last thing I'll say is I'm sure when you look at a traffic impact analysis, there's probably part of the cost allocation that suggests that the village may need to have to pay a portion of that, because it's not just the adjacent properties that are benefiting from these intersection improvements, it's the village as a whole. Now, I don't know if that's what the traffic impact analysis says, but it wouldn't shock me if that's the case. And if you want to use round numbers and you say basically the village as a whole is benefited 20% and the adjacent property owners are benefited 80%, then the letters of credit that you receive are only going to cover 80% of the borrowing, because the village has to pick up the rest. All of that can still be covered by the TID if you create it. But to go back to Joe's initial question, to me, that's likely critical to this process, because I don't think that you're going to get any developers to sign a development agreement where they provide a letter of credit if there's not increment that essentially is backing them up.
Other comments or questions?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So do we know, when we spoke about this earlier in the summer, when it was much warmer out, we had a discussion about how much the state would kick in. And I know that there was a kind of that comment of if we can find that out after this step, but I mean, do we have any appetite from the state? Because, and I'm going to go somewhere with this, which is when we talked about this at the time, we were talking about the increased amount of trucks that were coming out on Hogan from Octopi, and WEDC and other, state interests have spent money on putting it in there. Do they not see any sort of like PR value in coming out here and saying like, we support businesses that we gave money to by putting in a lot more money to do these improvements that they know need to be done anyway? Because I think we discussed the kind of silliness it would be on the state of if they do the road improvements and then if they do their road improvements and we drag our feet and then we have to go back and do a signalized intersection, that it would look bad for the state because the taxpayers would say, you just ripped all that up and did that. Now you're ripping up again to put this in there. I mean, has that conversation been had with the state?
Probably not in that entire context. Although the cost participation agreement, and Tim, you can jump in here too, but we believe the state has represented levels of participation that I wouldn't say we weren't banking on it, but I believe they showed participation in relation to, hey, since we're already digging this up currently, there's a level of stuff we would have had to do anyway, and your level of participation is a portion of that total cost. So to that extent, we feel like they've demonstrated state participation. Tim, do you have any context to that?
No, I was just, that's accurate. I think that, but to your point, we haven't talked about specific businesses and specific traffic generation. But there is a dollar figure in that municipal agreement, which splits out their cost versus our cost. And I can say that the cost that they've allocated, at least to the village, is, I don't know if significantly is the right word, but quite a bit less than what our engineering estimate came up for the cost. Now, the caveat to that is, though, as we'd all know with estimates and inflation and things like that, I don't know if that number is something to be wholly relied on, but I think it's more about the proportion. I guess the story that tells me is what is the cost of not participating? Maybe another way to look at it. But in answer to your question, we have a number, but I don't know if that's the number.
Okay. And can we, I mean, do we have any room to lobby with them over?
Well, we can ask, but I think what they've indicated to us to this point is the road improvement project to 19 demonstrates what their needs are. And so I don't think have come out and said, oh, we, the state, really need these 3 legs or whatever, or the improvements to include this turn lane, et cetera. I think they said essentially the improvements that we've shown in our plan are what we feel we need. And if you want something beyond that, it's on you. Short version. That's not their literal words, but
yeah, that sounds like a fair statement. And then the traffic impact analysis. Now I'm going to ask a really layered question here, so I'm sorry in advance. But I know that we're looking at parking ordinances as well. Is the traffic impact analysis based off of how much parking we would require on an average building, in that area if we're looking towards the future based off of our current standard?
It's not parking based. It's based on general assumptions regarding use that we've provided them in large part from our comp plan and our anticipated growth of the business park around that area, as well as existing uses, for example, a little farther down Hogan to include Arboretum Village. But I think the assumptions are based on trip generation by use, not necessarily parking.
Okay, but trip generation would be influenced by the number of people bringing their cars into there to work in these places, correct?
Correct.
And trucks for deliveries and things like that. So I guess I'm trying to, I fail to see how we can uncouple the two things just because of the fact that if we wave to one and we had mass transit tomorrow, for example, you know, like, would there be as much trip generation in there because now you wouldn't have as many people bringing their cars in? So
I would say it's possible. However, because I don't think that was at all factored into the TIA.
okay, I have another question to the developer. You used a dangerous word in there that I wrote down, and I would like to hear a little bit more of an explanation on it. You said that there's virtually no risk to the village. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Virtually no risk. That means that the TID plan that was done, the one that the JRB looked at, that's basically the model that the village would have. You change MLG and stats to village, and it shows that it pays off. You can pay for the improvements. You can pay to develop the intersection improvements. You can pay to develop business parks. So if the village borrows the money and your annual debt payments are say $100,000, just making up numbers, and there's only enough development that creates $95,000 worth of increment, that $5,000 is covered by the developer letter of credit. No risk to the village. And once that accumulates, all the annual payments, that's kind of a hard way to say it, but if you have the budget for having the roundabout or the intersection improvements done, and if it's covered by a letter of credit, developer's money, that's where the virtually no risk comes into the village. Yes, you're borrowing it, but it's backed by a letter of credit.
A letter of credit that's only as good as the company that's having the issuance. So if something should happen to the developer that they can no longer remain in business for any reason, I can't imagine that the lender that's doing that letter of credit is going to be okay with continuing to have a credit line.
Right. There's generally, if it expires in 30 days or whatever, and Brian, if you want to weigh in here.
Yeah, usually there's an automatic
draw.
Letter of credit that allows us to draw on it immediately in that circumstance.
Okay, but then somebody's gonna have to pay back. Who's going to be responsible for paying that back if the company goes out of business?
Not the village.
So we're just going to draw all the money out of it as fast as we can and hope for the best.
Well, we would draw the money that we can, and the language is structured so that there's nothing that we have to hope for. We have a right to draw on the money.
But when we draw on letters of credit, it gets paid back over time so we can do future draws? Or are we talking about like a single draw and then repayment?
If for all of our letter credit language, whether it's in the development agreement and then the LOC language matches that, if there's not a renewal or we have the right to draw on all of it immediately and we don't have to pay any of it back.
Okay.
I see Todd Taves jumping in if raise hand.
Yeah, I would just add one thing, the letter of credit is really the gold standard. But in this case, a secondary security is because these are public improvements, you certainly can levy a deferred special assessment against the benefiting properties. So, again, it's belts and suspenders, but what that would allow is if there was an event of non-payment, couldn't collect on the letter of credit for whatever reason, you would have a special assessment that would spring or automatically go against the property at that point. As long as any monies are paid on the tax bill, they go first to satisfy the special assessment. So there's going to be a delay in getting the money, but that would be a way, to effectively put a lien against the benefiting properties.
And you, Todd, thank you. You brought something up, which is my last question. Why could we not pursue something like a special assessment in lieu of this?
Well, I mean, my understanding, first of all, part of the benefited properties are not in the village now, and so we can't specially assess land that's not in the village. So that creates now our cost recovery against those entities. Because I agree with Todd, it's always nice to have, the letter of credit is what you want. And then if you get paid off under the letter of credit, then you're done. the second level is the special assessment, but then we wouldn't be able to collect that until they annexed into the village. And, you know, again, this all goes back to, this is why municipalities now do pay-go, because while we draft the letter of credit language, and I have been able to draw on letters of credit multiple times at different communities. If all of a sudden something happens to the bank and the money's not there, then you are right in what you're saying regarding there is risk. And to me, that's why it all goes back to why municipalities are getting away from we'll build it and pay for it and you back it up versus we will. And this goes back to Joe's point from the beginning of why TID 10 is critical. You know, you created a TIF district, you agree to pay them back for the public improvements they've made. That is the only situation where you have no risk from the standpoint of having to pay for something.
Thank you.
Joe, you look like you were deep in thought.
No, just processing.
Processing. Tricia?
And I apologize if this was said earlier in the introduction of this item. But other than just having the village do the borrowing under the tax exempt bond financing, what is the difference in rate between what we would be able to borrow at? And I feel like you said it and it didn't retain. Sorry. I don't know if that's a Todd question or.
I can jump in there.
Okay.
We borrow at prime, which is at 8.5 today. And I've seen numbers in project plans that say 4.5 for the village, 4.5, 5. They're talking about, the Federal Reserve's talking about another interest rate hike in November, 50-50 shot. So are you 8.5, 9%? And it's a ton more money just being paid to the bank that doesn't do any benefit for anybody in this room or in the village.
Okay, so that was my confusion a little bit. So the 5.5% that was noted in there, that's what we would expect if we did the bond financing for the village, not what you'd be able to get.
I'll let Todd answer that, but it's a lot closer than a 9%, which chews up all the additional funds for the intersection improvements.
Thank you.
We're more like 4 to 4.5 under current market conditions, assuming tax exempt debt.
All right, Nila.
I'm doing the same as Joe. I'm listening and processing and actually learning a lot. So thanks.
So we have 2 people who are missing today. Is it possible for us to bring this back to another board meeting, or I'm feeling like we don't necessarily have a consensus? Would you like us to discuss more until we reach a consensus? What are the implications of bringing this back again?
I would just offer, I'll need to circle back with DOT to see what, if any, cutoff date they're going to give us, because at some point they're going to give us one in terms of we need an answer on this municipal agreement regarding the funding of the DOT improvements, because as I mentioned, the project is supposed to be constructed in 2026. And all the state process, which I'm not that familiar with, all those wheels need to turn. And we've already asked for several extensions from them. And so essentially what we've been told is by year end, if we don't have an answer. So just hopefully that doesn't sound like, putting up against the wall, but in some respects we are to a degree. So the more we delay this, the more likelihood will be of getting excluded from that project. Now, that's my assumption without speaking to anyone with the DOT, specifically about this and getting a hard and fast date.
I'm going to make a motion because I think that we just need to keep the conversation moving forward. And since we're not taking final action on any TID creation tonight. So I'm going to motion that we express support for the conceptual approach to public improvements with TID 10, wherein the village would borrow for and construct the public improvements.
I'll second that, Robert.
All right. Any discussion on the motion?
No change to the motion, but just a note. I'm wondering if with your conversations, ongoing conversations with DOT, Tim, if there's any clarity or more certainty that they could provide us, I think that will be helpful for our future discussions on this.
Noted.
All right. Any further discussion or comment? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed?
No.
All right, motion carries. All right, thank you all for the robust discussion. And we are now on to item 5. Discuss and take action on possible acquisition of downtown parcel for redevelopment. And do we discuss in open session and then I read the statement, or?
Well, I would just note that, I mean, I would note the change in the agenda item where it says a singular parcel as opposed to parcels to the, I know that you have heard from residents who seem to be concerned about the action that the board may or may not take. And obviously, based on the modification to the agenda language, we are only discussing one parcel. At the same time, it is my opinion that we should go into closed session to discuss it, because if we do that, the discussion on closed session is going to be terms and conditions of a potential offer.
I was gonna say, so if we come to we're not voting in closed session, but if we come into an agreement with what's presented tonight, can we come out of closed session? I know people will be gone, but can we come out of closed session, and since we would have conceptually agreed at that point, or do we have to wait until we take an action from that? I'm just trying to understand when the public can be aware.
So my recommendation is that if we take action tonight, that we do it in closed session. We could do it such that those closed session minutes at some point in time could become public, but that you don't actually identify the property that you're looking to acquire until the actual offer is made to the property owner by village staff.
Okay, well, let me rephrase my question then. At what point would the public have a chance to weigh in on the action that we took place, like at this, to the board, or is it just become people write letters to the editor?
Well, I would say, I mean, every meeting we've had public comments, and we've had public policy discussion on the concept of acquiring property. And so any member of the public at the last 2 meetings could have already, for example, said, I don't believe that the village should spend public money to acquire land. I mean, so I think they've already had that opportunity. As it pertains to the existing parcel, I mean, this is my recommendation. At the end of the day, if a majority of the board thinks that the village should identify the parcel before the offer is made, that's ultimately your decision.
And that's a decision we would make in closed session.
Well, I would say this, I mean, if,
Vote on an open session and.
well, I
discuss in
mean,
closed?
it's, I guess I don't know the process that you want to utilize. Do you want to discuss I mean, the terms and conditions for the discussion should definitely be in closed session. You always have the ability, if you want to say, Brian, we disagree with you and we want to make an open session motion because we want to identify that property for the public. I mean, the other question that, and again, I'm not suggesting doing this, but theoretically, you always have the ability to identify it and then say, before we make an offer, we want the public to know what property we're talking about, and we want their input on that property. In which case, then you would definitely be identifying that property probably at your next meeting, because obviously a number of people have left, and you have the ability to do that. Again, my recommendation is not to do it that way because I'm concerned about the impact on the cost, but that's just my legal opinion. And you have the ability to say we disagree. And from a policy perspective, we want people to weigh in on this.
All right. Thank you for the advice. Other comments before we decide whether we're going into closed session? All right. So statement first, vote to go into closed session second. I always forget.
Yeah, I would read the whole paragraph and then we'd have the roll call vote.
All right. The village board may convene in closed session as authorized by Wisconsin statute 19.851E for the purpose of deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. The village board may reconvene in open session and discuss and take action on the subject matter discussed in closed session. All right. Do we have a motion to go into closed session?
I'll move to go into closed session.
I'll second. All right, roll call vote.
Nila Frye,
Yes.
Tricia Braun,
Yes.
Kristen Rungy,
Yes.
Joe Zitzelsberger,
Yes.
Robert McPherson.
Yes.
All right.